From White Dwarf and the Black Library, Tatters of Hope by William Crow. Years ago, before his home world burned, before the rout and the siege, Haravir had stood in a plaza much like the one he stood in now. He had stood at attention amongst 1,000 other conscripts of his age, chin jutting proudly, back stiff and straight despite the unfamiliar weight of his new flak armor. That was the day he had spoken the oath of duty unto death and begun his service as an imperial guardsman. He had been proud then to say he served the emperor. Now the memory filled him with disgust. How weak he'd been. The fine mist of blood spattering across his face brought Haravir back to the present moment, the traitor chieftain's pale eyes refocused, taking in the scene. His outstretched arm, his notched cleaver buried in the throat of the prisoner before him. With a dismissive snort, Haravir wrenched his weapon free and marched towards the next man in line. "Maybe you've got a better answer for me." The capital plaza of Gavengard had become a place of execution. Crucified soldiers writhed and struggled, their limbs pinned to the struts of the tank traps that lined the square. They had been the Maligna's chosen, hardened renegades tasked with protecting the traitor warlord during the battle. That fight should have finally ended the damned siege, finally broken the loyalist lapdogs who still claimed the city. But just when triumph had been within their grasp, the Imperials had pulled back like cowards. And then the news came that the Maligna was dead, and what had seemed like an easy victory was revealed as a diversion. Haravir intended to find out what had gone wrong. The hulking chieftain paused in front of his next victim, making a show of hefting the cleaver, resettling his grip on its blood-slicked haft. He let the moment stretch, aware of the gaze of his assembled soldiers on him. He kept control, but he couldn't deny the urgent need, the anger and adrenaline burning through his blood, telling him to hack and tear and... Haravir finally deigned to look at the man he was about to kill. He recognized the face, despite the jagged lines of the 8-pointed star tattooed across his features. Parson. He'd been called back home, back before things fell apart. Shared recognition flared in Parson's fear-filled eyes, and he struggled harder against his restraints, pleading for his life through torn lips. "Please, Harrow, I never—" "None of that," Haravir growled, cutting off his old comrade's plea. "We don't beg for nothing now." Resigned, Parson fell silent, and Haravir leaned in close and asked the same question he had asked all his prisoners, and would go on asking until every one of them was dead and he was entirely satisfied with their unanimous answer. Who did it? Who snuck in and killed the master? He already knew the answer, of course. The rumor was spreading through the renegades' ranks, shaking their tenuous alliances. A loyalist death squad, saboteurs who had severed the heretic supply lines, cut down their bloodied veterans, and assassinated their leader with impunity. They were fearless, the tales went. They couldn't be killed. Nonsense, Haravir knew. There's nothing can't be killed with a sharp enough blade. But a rumor like that could be a dangerous thing. He would stamp it out. He would make his soldiers fear him more than they feared the unseen enemy. This present show of force, this act of disciplinary torture, was all for their benefit after all. Haravir tapped his cleaver on his prisoner's shoulder, willing him to speak the name. "The Kasrkin," Parson groaned. "The Tattershields." Haravir brought the cleaver down in a hard overhand swing, and blood gushed. Tattershields. Haravir had heard the storied squad name many times that morning. It had been the last word spoken by every single prisoner he had executed. Parson's blood ran in streams down his blackened armor, splashing Haravir's boots. The chieftain watched it pool with a hungry fascination. He saw his future in that growing crimson puddle. This was the path he had always been meant to walk, ever since the day he had took his oaths. He had sworn once to spill the blood of the Emperor's enemies. Now a primal voice from deep inside his thumping veins told him that it didn't matter whose blood spilled, just so long as it flowed and flowed. He could do that. He was good at that. Today he would shed the blood of prisoners and failures. Tomorrow, Haravir swore, he would see these Tattershields choke in their own gore. Screams and pleas and bodies racked with pain. The same bloody scene was played out in another district of the damned besieged city. Under the harsh white glow of the suspensor lumen shining over his shoulder, combat medic Savos Lind assessed his patient. The man who lay on the blood-stained auto-gurney in front of him was barely 20 years old, already a veteran of 2 unwinnable wars, and he was about to die. "That's all right, lad," the medic said. He spoke continually as he worked, keeping his voice as reassuring as he could. He didn't really believe that his patient heard the words through his fear and pain, but they were the only mercy he could offer now. "You've done your duty." Though he was barely conscious, the trooper's pupils were widely dilated, his eyes swiveling as he searched for some route to escape from his suffering. Lind recognized the signs. He already knew there was only one path left open for the young soldier, but that did not mean he would meekly accept it. Every imperial casualty was a small defeat that Lind fought against until the end. The medic laid aside the blood-slicked surgical tools, dropping them into a steel tray with a loud clatter. With practiced movements, he locked his palms over the patient's breastbone and began compressing, mentally counting off the heartbeat rhythm to the meter of a marching song that had been drilled into him as a white shield. All who serve loyally to the throne, to sit at the side of the Emperor. The soldier was dead before the medic reached the second verse. With a resigned sigh, Lind folded the young man's hands across his chest, forming the sign of the Aquila. He guided the soldier's eyelids closed with ceremonial gentleness. The ritual complete, Lind glanced at his chrono, noting the time of death. The numbers swam hazy before his bleary eyes. Beside him, a Medicaid-grade servitor shuffled forward, looming over the dead soldier to harvest viable organs from the still-warm corpse. A gleaming rig of pneumatically motivated scalpels and forceps began to prise the body apart, and Lind felt a roil of mingled guilt and nausea squirm in his gut. "Steady on," he told himself. "Take a breath." He yanked aside the plastic curtain that screened off the surgical bays and stepped out into the vast chamber beyond. Originally constructed as a storehouse meant to supply the city throughout years of siege, the cavernous space had been repurposed as a triage unit. Massive bays that once held rations, tools, and equipment were all but empty now, and in their place the chamber had filled with wounded soldiers, dying soldiers. Lind corrected himself bitterly. "We've always got plenty of dying soldiers." The medic walked on, trying to clear his head, threading his way through rows of bodies that stretched across the rock-crete floor in all directions. It had been 2 days since the battle, and casualties were still being brought in. Even without an exact reckoning, Lind knew that Anvil Battalion was shattered. They had engaged the traitor force en masse, staging a heroic, near-suicidal diversion, while Lind and his fellow Kasrkin struck what they had hoped would be a decisive blow against the enemy leadership. Against the odds, the mission had succeeded. The Maligner was dead, but from where Lind was standing, it didn't seem like a victory. He could not remember the last time he had slept. Before that deployment for the mission, certainly. 3 days then? 4? Recent events blurred together. Every time he blinked, he saw flashes of nightmarishly distorted bodies twisted by the touch of chaos. Worse, he had kept seeing the features of slain comrades, imposed by his overwrought mind over the grimacing faces of the wounded. Riel's haunted eyes, old Sujek's broken nose, the cocky smirk that Erin always wore, right up to the night he vanished on patrol. He pinched the bridge of his nose, trying to clear his clouded mind. When that didn't help, he struck himself across the face hard enough to draw a shocked look from a passing orderly. Lind caught the younger medic's gaze, and the boy quickly averted his eyes. Everyone held the Kasrkin in awe, and no small measure of fear. Lind was a Tattershield. The name carried weight. He was a hero, a saviour, and a pitiless killer all at once. Stepping out into the clammy, recirculated air of an access corridor, out of sight of the regular troops, Lind allowed himself to sag. With his shoulders braced on a wall, he let his shaven head thunk back against the cool stone. Not for the first time, his sword slipped to the combat stims nestled at the bottom of the med pack strapped to his hip. Frighteningly low on supplies as they were, he knew that every dose had to be carefully conserved, every use justified. But a desperate, exhausted part of him asked, "How long can you go on without them?" It was tempting. But Lind had been trained harshly and unceasingly to push himself to the limits of human endurance. In any case, he knew too well the effects of stim dependence, the feverish agitation, the uncontrolled aggression. In high enough doses, stims could drive even the most disciplined soldier to violent psychosis. It was then that he realized, with an unsettling sensation, that his hand had slipped unconsciously into his med pack. He scowled, snatched his hand back, and forced the satchel closed. It took more willpower than he wanted to admit. The problem, he realized, was one of simple logistics. The Imperials had held out against overwhelming odds for more than 2 years already, but they wouldn't last another week once the field rations expired and the last of the lasgun power packs burned out. It wasn't the lack of combat-fit soldiers, but the lack of supplies that would finish them. They had to do something. Now. Reaching a decision, he peeled off his blood-stained gloves and went to see the sergeant. Lind found Sergeant Constantine Takon in the cramped subterranean chamber the soldiers called the Strategium, with no small amount of irony. It was a grand name for a map table and half a dozen exhausted officers sharing grim news in anxious voices. Takon stood out amongst them. Like Lind, the sergeant was Kasrkin. Despite the immense pressure he was under, there was no slip in his discipline, no visible break in his concentration. If Lind had not known him so well, he would never have spotted the signs of strain. But Lind knew Takon better than anyone, and the medic's keen eye missed nothing. He's close to cracking, Lind thought. Somehow that worried him even more than their untenable strategic situation. They had served together for the better part of a decade. Experienced and highly trained as they were, both were struggling with the new responsibilities they had been forced to shoulder in the past few months, as the chain of command collapsed and Anvil Battalion became cut off from the main body of the Imperial forces. Takon was trained to lead a squad of expert killers in the field. Now he found himself coordinating an entire battlefront. It had been Takon who ordered the attack that cost the battalion so dearly. Lind could plainly see the guilt of it on his old friend's face, in the rigid set line of his jaw, in the ferocious concentration in his dark eyes. As he approached, Lind caught the tail of Takon's conversation. He was in hushed, intense conference with Senovich, the Tattershields comm specialist. His report was bleak. "For now, they're in disarray," the Vox trooper was saying. "For now," Takon repeated the words, weighing the danger that implied. "But there are already signs that they are regrouping." "Yes," Chenovich confirmed, after the briefest hesitation. "We're intercepting chatter. One of the Maligna's old chieftains has started rounding up dissenters, stamping his authority." "Do we mark him for an execution strike? Keep them on the back foot?" A young sergeant from the Shock Corps spoke up, his face shadowed with a week's worth of patchy stubble. Takon dismissed the suggestion with a shake of his head. "It's just delaying tactics. High risk, little long-term gain. "We won't last that long in any case," Lind announced, as he fell in beside his commander. Wordlessly deferring, the lesser adjuncts made space for him. Takon greeted Lind with a nod as the medic continued. "Not without resupply. Half the battalion's gone, and most of the rest are walking wounded." "You have a proposal?" Takon asked. Unlike the regular Imperial troopers, Kasrkin were trained to think with a certain degree of independence, to offer suggestions and share experience, bringing a degree of creativity to the work of slaughtering the Emperor's enemies. Lind loomed over the map table, scanning the hastily redrawn lines of the shattered redoubt city, until he found what he was searching for. There was an old supply depot in Miniature District, fully stocked, at least before we had to abandon it. "Most likely it's been looted already," Senovich put in. "It's deep in enemy territory." It was true enough. The Imperials had lost control of the district some 6 months before, when the Maligners' relentless assaults cut them off from their allies to the east. Lind let a wolfish smile play across his lips. "But that enemy is busy fighting amongst themselves, at least for now." Takon considered the possibility. "Lind's right. If we give the traitors time to regroup, we're finished." "We don't have the strength to engage them directly," Senovich countered. "Not yet." Takon circled the table, then brought a finger down at the map's eastern edge. Everyone's gaze slipped to the location he pointed out, the vast bastion of the eastern garrison. "We left them well supplied and dug in deep, with a full artillery division in support. Those guns could turn the tide if we could just link up with them." "With respect, we've had no word from them, none, for months now." Senovich paused, weighing his words. "They're gone, sir." "We don't know that for sure," Takon said, "but I intend to find out." His tone changed, growing curt and clipped, indicating the time for debate was done. "Muster the Tattershields. We're going east." "You can't be part of this, Constantine." Everyone turned in surprise at Lind's words, and the medic felt momentarily unsure. "You're needed here." Takon leant in closer, keeping his voice low. "I'm no Marshal, Savos. I'm more use at the front. You are more use as a symbol. The troops have to know there's someone still in charge. A damned hero at that." Takon scowled at that description, but it was clear that the medic was right. The Bastion's shaky morale survived only so long as the Tattershields led by example. Even so, Lind knew how hard it must be for Takon to contemplate sending his squad into danger without him. "All right," the sergeant said at last. "Then you'll lead the mission." Lind opened his mouth to object, then promptly closed it again. There were no alternatives left to suggest. The Tattershields gathered in the dimly lit heat of a subterranean hangar bay, a sprawling chamber that had once held entire squadrons of tanks, troop transports, and the armoured shells of self-propelled field guns. Now, like the storerooms deeper in the bunker complex, the hangar was all but empty. The sharp report of every step Lind took echoed off slab walls and abandoned machinery. 10 soldiers waited for him, drawn up into 2 neat ranks, facing each other across a sloping metal gangway. Takon had entrusted Lind with 2 demi-squads. The lead Kasrkin would be accompanied by a detachment of 5 veterans from the infantry corps. Lind had been assured that they were some of the battalion's best, some of the few who were still unhurt, more like. But despite his misgivings, he found a smile spreading on his face as he spotted Auric amongst them. The newly promoted squad leader stood rigidly to attention, his chin raised proudly. The guardsman had proven his loyalty time and again, even when his former squad turned traitor. He matched Lind's smile with a rough grin of his own that stretched the taut, scarred flesh covering half of his face. "How are the wounds, trooper?" Lind opened as he came to a stop before the assembled soldiers. "Healing quick, sir," Auric answered. "Thanks to you." Then he added, with a glance towards the infantryman lined up beside him, "We won't let you down, sir." I know you won't. Lind nodded approvingly. Loyal and hungry for a fight, every one of them. Oryx set a good example. Lind had seen how ferocious the trooper was in battle. He's almost as crazy as Auber. The thought made Lind turn to the waiting Kasrkin. Auber, their demolitions expert, was first to meet his gaze. She gave the medic a tight nod, acknowledging his authority as ranking officer on this particular mission. After Lind and Sergeant Takon, Auber was the squad's most senior member. She had a furious temper, and a streak of unreasoning zealotry that had grown worryingly extreme since their retreat from Cadia. But first and foremost, she was Kasrkin. Lind knew that she would follow his orders without hesitation. He ran his eyes down the line, reviewing the Kasrkin he had known so long. Auber, Vegan, Senovich, young Yarin, and the shell-shocked heavy weapons expert who answered only to Gunner, and no one else. No Reel, no Eren, only the empty space where they should have stood. No sense in dwelling on the dead, Lind told himself. You have your mission. Lind turned his attention to the transports they had requisitioned, a pair of retrofitted ridge haulers. The industrial hulks had been reinforced with layers of salvaged metal plating, and a devastating storm bolter had been welded into a turret mounting on the lead vehicle, lending them some heavy firepower. The engines idled, filling the air with oily promethium fumes. Lind wrinkled his nose. Well, they aren't pretty, and they certainly aren't quiet, he remarked with his usual cynicism. But then he became aware of the soldiers, his soldiers, attention on him, and quickly backtracked. But we don't need them to be. This isn't another stealth insertion, sir? Yarin asked, a note of surprise in his tone. It is not. Lind gave his squad a moment to make their mental readjustments. Then he laid out the odds. We're going in quick and precise. The enemy is disorganized and dispersed. We'll cut right through their territory in strength enough to make them think twice about starting a fight. If any of the assembled troopers had doubts about the feasibility of these orders, they kept them to themselves. The long dusk was settling over the ruined city, stretching the shadows of shell-crumbled towers into the muggy purple half-light. No one liked to look at Gavain's tormented sky for too long. Behind the leaden ash clouds, the night boiled with a purple aurora, caused by the warp storms that cut the world off from any hope of reinforcement. The queasy light slipped into the hauler's hold through narrow gun slits, painting the Kasrkin's faces in unnatural hues. Auber made a superstitious gesture, jabbing 2 fingers towards the poisoned sky. Seated in the forward passenger seat as Vigan drove, Lind avoided the disturbing view, keeping his attention on the rubble-cluttered streets and looming ruins, which could conceal snipers or worse. They were making good time at least. The haulers could climb and ride the dunes of debris, tackling all but the highest drifts with ease. They crested a steep wave of rubble, and the vehicle bounced heavily. The Kasrkin in the hold gripped webbing and rebar struts, thrown around with bone-rattling force. Eyes front, Vigan, Senovich yelled over the din of the engines, clutching his frequently repaired Voxcaster tight to his chest. It's worse than a combat drop back here. The squadmates laughed, but it was a brittle sound. They remembered their last orbital drop all too well. The terrifying plunge through Gavain's burning atmosphere, plummeting with damaged engines while under fire from mutineers who had taken over their frigate. Been through worse? Yarin offered hopefully, and the Tattershields grumbled their agreement. Lind double-checked the map on his mission's data slate. The junction that led on to the due east processional was only a short distance ahead, but he intended to make a diversion. At the medic's insistence, Takon had agreed to authorize a secondary objective. The abandoned depot was close enough. They could load up the haulers with life-saving supplies and be moving again in no time. At least, that's how Lind had sold it. Turn in here, he told Vigan, and the Kasrkin driver yanked back on the steering rig, turning the vehicle with minimal loss of speed. A chorus of complaints came from the soldiers in the hold, and then the Vox warbled. notifying them of an incoming transmission. Lind went cold. He had given explicit orders to maintain Vox silence, except in an emergency. "We've caught a tail." It was Lesko, the driver of the second hauler. "Closing fast astern." The Kasrkin reacted as one. Without hesitation or the need for orders, they pivoted in their seats, pressing hell guns into gun slits, squinting down the weapon sights, hunting targets in the gloom. Over the rumble of the transport's engines, they could make out a deeper growling roar, growing louder, closer. Dark shapes sped through the ruins alongside them, glimpsed through crumbled archways, threading through the heaped debris. With a howl of overcharged engines, they burst from the shadows, drawing alongside the speeding haulers like wolves harrying their prey. Their pursuers were mounted on Atalan-pattern recon bikes, each carrying a rider and a gunner. Lind caught glimpses of imperial flak armor, half obscured by ragged cloaks and the tightly bound hoods which covered their faces. Filtering the swirling grey dust, they kicked up as they rode. Deserters, then, or heretics. As the bikes accelerated into range, they opened fire. They were armed with little more than stubbers, shotguns, a few las rifles. Not enough to pierce the retrofitted ridge haulers' thickened armor, maybe, but enough to suppress the Imperial's return fire long enough to get in close. Close enough to blast out the haulers' massive wheels or deliver a few melter charges. And then it would be over. "Gunner!" Lind barked, opening a Vox channel to the rooftop turret. "Show them our teeth!" Maybe a display of force would be enough to drive the renegades off. Gunner gave no word of acknowledgement, but the thunderous roar of the storm bolter told Lind that his order had been received. The noise inside the cabin was deafening, disorienting. The medic risked a glance behind, leaning from the passenger side window just long enough to make a rapid tactical assessment. The raiders were already upon them. They rode with reckless skill, jinking through the explosive hail of bolter shells. Lind saw one bike pull in dangerously close to the second hauler, dodging bursts of defensive fire from Oryx veterans. The rider was hunched low over the handlebars, holding the dirt cycle in tight formation while her passenger readied a grenade. That was when Gunner brought the storm bolter to bear. Mass reactive rounds tore into the bike, detonating in a series of fiery flashes that sent both riders cartwheeling through the air. A yell from the hold dragged Lind's attention from the fading fireball. "Starboard side!" Yaren called, as he fired on the moving target through a gun slit. "Pulling ahead!" Lind craned around, quickly pinpointing the speeding bike amidst the frantic confusion of the chase. "I see him!" The medic braced a hand against the dashboard, steadying his held gun over his extended arm. His first shot missed the biker's skull by the barest margin. His second struck the machine's reinforced cowl, raising a shower of sparks, but the bike didn't slow. Beside him, Vigan spared a quick glance as he plowed the hauler through a long disused barricade in a shower of sparks and rusty metal. Despite his intense concentration, the driver seemed entirely unfazed. Abruptly, the overtaking bike skidded to a halt across their path. Lind's eyes widened when he saw the passenger heft a missile launcher onto his shoulder. "Rocket!" Lind shouted the warning, but Vigan had already made his decision. He didn't swerve. He gritted his teeth and accelerated towards the bike, calling out a single instruction. "Brace!" The biker's nerve broke first. Gunning the engine, the dirt cycle lurched forward, throwing the passenger's aim. With a flare of flame, the rocket struck, not impacting the hauler, but the building beside it. The grey stonework slumped and began to slip, crashing across the road, burying bike and transport both in a crushing avalanche of rockcrete. With no time to swerve, the second hauler collided with the first, jackknifed, and came to a stop, wedged across the road. Coughing gritty dust from his lungs, Lind heaved himself out of the passenger seat, ducking low under the compact cabin roof. "Injuries?" he called, absently tugging a thick shard of armor glass out of his cheek. The Tattershields sounded off in response, scraped and shaken, but all somehow alive. The medic pushed through the cramped hold, running through a mental diagnostic. Injuries negligible, armor sealed, hellgun armed and powered. He knew every one of the Kasrkin was following the same procedure. Lind peered through a gun slit set in the transport's loading doors. In the half-light beyond, the bikers circled, whooping triumphantly. Soon, he knew, they would close in for the kill. With a dramatic swerve, the gang leader swung his bike to a halt, kicking up a plume of dust in his wake. Driving one polished boot into the rubble, he posed atop his dirt cycle with arrogant assuredness, holding up a melter bomb in one gauntleted fist. He was going to make a show of finishing off their prey. His followers cheered for him. Unease ran cold through Lind's veins. Under his flapping wrappings, the renegade wore the distinct carapace armor of the Kasrkin. And there, painted on the shoulder, Lind could make out a shattered black shield, the insignia of their squad. ELDEN. The thought made Lind's stomach lurch. Could he really be alive? The medic hesitated, mind racing, but before he could act, a furious commotion pulled his attention. With a fiery battle cry, Auric and his guardsmen came charging out from behind the stalled haulers, las guns blazing. The bikers throttled up at once, engines snarled as the renegades peeled away, wheeled, then swung back towards the determined Imperials, returning fire. Lind felt their options falling away. "Tattershields," he ordered. "On me!" He kicked open the loading doors and the squad charged out as one. The Kasrkin spread out in an exact fan formation, hotshot las rounds punching towards them, dazzlingly bright in the purple twilight. A riderless bike skimmed to a halt, trailing oily smoke. A renegade fell dead from the saddle, tangled in the whipping chain he had never got close enough to strike with. Striding forward with his rifle couched at his shoulder, Lind scoured the kill zone for the enemy leader. The medic refused to think of him as Erin, not until he had hard evidence. He could see the skirmish was quickly turning in their favor. The bikers' unearned confidence was melting away. Shocked by the unexpected ferocity of the Imperial's resistance, the renegades' shouts became frantic, their fire patterns wild and desperate. They came for easy prey, Lind thought. They got Kasrkin instead. Then Lind caught sight of his quarry. The gang leader swung his dirt cycle in a tight loop, circling his hand above his head, calling off his pack. The medic fired after him, aiming low in an effort to take the traitor alive. He had to be sure. But through the smoke and dust, Lind's shots went wide, and in a moment the gangers were gone, save for the fading growls of their engines. Lind knew they had to move quickly to get the mission back on track. "Clear the rubble and winch that hauler free," he commanded. "I want both transports ready to run by the time we get back." "Get back, sir?" Yaren paused, already wrestling a chunk of fallen masonry from the ground. "We can't lose momentum, not this far out in enemy territory. We push on foot." The squad set to work, all except Senovich, who sidled up close behind the medic with a worried look on his face. "You saw him too, didn't you?" "That was—" "We don't know who it was." Lind cut off the line of questioning, but secretly he was relieved to know he hadn't been the only one to see the apparition from their past. While Auber, Weigen and Auric supervised the guardsmen in freeing the haulers, Lind led the remaining Tattershields towards their objective. It did not escape their notice that their route took them in the same direction the gangers had fled. The squad moved in single file, Yaren scouting ahead, while Gunnar brought up the rear, hefting his melter gun. Gradually looming up behind cracked walls and burnt-out bunkers, the depot came into view. A windowless, slab-sided warehouse with a Medicae helix picked out in flaking red paint on its whitewashed wall. Its great metal loading doors gaped, and a faint light spilled out from the supposedly abandoned structure. Lind cursed inwardly. "Someone's inside." "I think I know who," Yaren whispered at his commander's side. The recon trooper pointed, and Lind cursed again. Tucked in behind the open doors, almost lost in shadow, he could see the familiar sleek shapes of Atalan bikes. The Tattershields approached the building, hunkered low, fanning out as they crossed the rockreach towards the depot. They met no resistance as they slipped around the open door, emerging into a warehouse lined with crates. each neatly stamped with the same red helix. Lind felt a proud burst of vindication. Morphia, sterile dressings, stims, enough supplies to last for months. But as the Kasrkin pushed deeper into the building, he realized that many of the crates had been smashed open. Broken vials crunched under his boots. Chemical stains darkened the stone floor. Ahead, Yarin threw up a hand, signaling halt. Lind crept up beside him, silent and tense. The medic peered through a narrow gap between two tight-packed shelving units, and he saw the enemy. The gangers had made a rough camp in the open space of an abandoned loading bay. Some lounged languidly on crates, while others paced frantically in tight circles, like feral animals caged in their own bodies. Lind noted the syringes in their hands, the empty vials littering the floor, and he assessed their condition with the observational skill of a trained medic. Stimmers. Many of the gangs had shed the cloaks and wrappings they had worn earlier, and Lind could now clearly see the stigmata of advanced addiction to combat drugs and gene-bulking agents. Pupils huge, breath rasping, muscles unnaturally swollen and threaded with bulging blackened veins. Some of the traitors displayed signs of ritualistic scarring and decorative self-mutilation. Lind had seen it happen before, when the drug's pain-deadening effects left addicts numb and craving sensation. He was repulsed. Yet a part of him still had to know if Erin was amongst this degenerate crew. He peered about the low-lit chamber, searching. There. The leader was crouched amongst his throng of followers, dispensing vials with indulgent care. He had his back to Lind, but he was still clad in the unmistakable Kasrkin armor. With silent hand gestures, Lind ordered the Tattershields to spread out along the stacks, positioning themselves to catch the gangers in a crossfire if things went wrong. And how could this great plan go wrong? Lind chastised himself, blowing out a long, soft breath through his teeth. He couldn't believe what he was considering. "Erin!" he called. The gangers reacted with unnerving speed, springing to their feet, drawing weapons, but the leader simply stood, unhurried, and did not turn. From his arrogant, assured posture, he seemed more amused than concerned by the Tattershield's sudden arrival, and wouldn't that be just like Erin? "Come to finish us, comrades!" The deserter's words were wet and slurred. Lind couldn't be sure if he knew the voice or not. He edged sideways, keeping the stacked crates between him and the gang leader, as his followers began to stalk forward with predatory intent. "Come to punish us for choosing our path." "We've come here for supplies," Lind answered, keeping the ganger talking as he repositioned. "Consider this a one-time deal. Leave what we need, and you can walk away." The ganger laughed, a vile, wet sound. His voice was growing harsher, more agitated as he spoke. "Maybe you should walk away, hypocrite. You think you're doing the Emperor's work, but you're just as bad as Horavir's blood-mad renegades. Well, we won't bow to him, or you, or anyone. Never again." Lind had no idea what the stimmer meant, but it was clear that he was on the verge of losing control. The medic tightened his grip on his las rifle, risked a glance around the crate that sheltered him. The stimmer, the deserter, Erin, was right behind him. If he was snarling or smiling, Lind couldn't tell. The traitor's lips had been cut away, leaving only a circular wound that showed off a set of teeth set in livid purple gums. But there was still enough of his face left to identify him. Despite the heretic's fearsome appearance, Lind felt only relief. It's not Erin, just a scavenger in stolen armor, some aspiring chieftain who wouldn't live to earn the fearsome reputation that armor carried. The stimmer sprang forward, swiping a hooked knife at the medic's face. Lind fired as he dodged aside, placing a precise shot above the ganger's hip, where the carapace armor was weakest. The moment Lind's shot rang out, the Tattershields opened up, firing from hidden positions. The stimmers rushed towards the stack, screaming obscenities, only to die in the Kasrkin's disciplined volley. Drug-frenzied as they were, Not one of them tried to flee, not even the Tattershields, sensing a quick victory, broke cover. They advanced from all sides, striding forward with controlled aggression, herding the traitors down into the loading pit with devastating bursts of las fire. Not one of them escaped the Kasrkin's cold wrath. A trail of blood led Lind to his quarry. The gang leader had dragged himself some way across the rock-crete floor, kept alive only by the narcotics boiling through his system. One hand was clamped to the gaping wound in his side, hauling in a fistful of las-charred entrails. His glassy gaze was fixed on the overturned crate, hungrily eyeing the vials of stims that spilled from it. He reached out as the medic approached, but Lind's boot descended on his wrist, pinning it in place. The stimmer looked up, purple eyes wide, eyes swiveling, searching for escape. Lind looked down. His gaze was cold and steady. With one clean movement, he put a lasbolt through the renegade's skull, and that, he thought, was its own kind of mercy. In the aftermath of the firefight, the Imperials took everything they could carry, filling satchels and hefting smaller crates onto their armored shoulders. Lind cast a last glance over the valuable supplies left on the shelves, galled to be leaving them, but hoping there would be time to send the haulers back for more. It's better than nothing, he thought. It's a few more lives won. Grunting under the weight of the recovered resources, the Tattershields set off at a quick jog. Muscle memory guided Lind's steps into a familiar rhythm, while the old words ran silently through his mind. All who serve loyally to the throne. It took them less than an hour to slip back through the quiet streets. By then, all of them were aching from the exertion. But when they saw the flickering orange glow up ahead, their pace quickened. No, Lind thought, feeling a spark of panic. Up ahead, both ridge haulers were burning. Bodies lay horribly still amidst the rubble. Lind dropped the crate he was carrying and burst into a full sprint, the instincts of a combat medic briefly overruling his role as a ranking officer. He rushed to the nearest prone figure, dimly aware of Yaren keeping pace beside him, auspex raised in one hand, scanning for signs of ambushers. But there was no one lying in wait, and no one living to hear them as they approached. Their bodies were horribly mangled, recognizable as infantrymen only by their battered flak armor. "Alba!" Lind shouted, voice bouncing off the slab walls on all sides. "Auric! Answer me!" But the darkening night gave no answer, except for the steady crackling of flames. With a resounding clang of twisting steel, the low cable pulled taut. "Clear!" The veteran guardsmen who were clustered near the ridge hauler scrambled back, creating space around the awakening machine. A great cloud of greasy black promethium smoke belched from the hauler's exhaust vents as its powerful engine revved up. Heavy-duty tires spun, kicked dust, then bit. With a metallic groan, the hulking transport lurched, rocked, and began to rumble forward. Behind it, the inches-thick tow cord rattled and flexed under the strain of dragging its load. Gradually, tortuously, like a Caducean whale heaved from the depths on a trawling line, the hauler pulled its freight free from the great heap of rubble it had been buried under. Masonry shifted and fell, and the second ridge hauler was dragged into view behind the first, its boxy hull dented and rent. The assembled guardsmen greeted the retrieval of their secondary transport with a weary cheer, but their squad leader, Auric, cut off their premature celebrations with a sharp snap. "Keep it hush now," the veteran growled, his voice as low and hoarse as the hauler's laboring engine. "We don't want to attract any more attention." That sobered them. The last warband they encountered had run their convoy off the road and might have killed them all. The opportunistic enemy had mistaken them for a lightly armed resupply train, not a tooled-up strike team headed by a squad of elite Kasrkin. That miscalculation was all that had saved them. From her vantage point, atop a shell-damaged pass overlooking the crash site, Ziva Orber kept half an eye on the retrieval operation. The rest of the Kasrkin's hawk-like attention was engaged in a loop of observation and assessment, sweeping the area for any movement, any small change that might suggest the presence of an enemy. They had been stalled here almost an hour so far. Nothing had changed, but still she remained rigid, focused, alert. There had been a time when she could have remained like that almost indefinitely, even after her limbs went numb and her vision swam with exhaustion. Let the regular troops slacken and complain. Kasrkin were a breed apart. But these days, for all her discipline, Alba had to admit she felt restless. It had started after Cadia, during the Great Retreat, after the numb shock of defeat had faded. In those first bleak weeks, Alba had seen so many survivors fall apart, broken by grief and shame. She hadn't understood it at all. They were alive, weren't they? What more proof could they need that the Emperor himself had singled them out? The veterans of the Fall had battled through the fires of a dying world to prove their mettle under his stern gaze. Alba had no doubt they had a purpose, and every moment that wasn't spent fulfilling it with lasgun knife or melter mine was a moment wasted. "Come on," she grumbled under her breath. "What's taking so long?" After the ambush, the rest of her squad had pushed on to secure their objective, leaving Alba to supervise the infantrymen digging out their crashed transports. She was not overly worried for her squad-mate's safety. There was no such thing as safety on Gavain, and anyway, the Tattershields, worn thin though they were still amongst the most dangerous combatants on the damned world's surface. Alba could face down impossible odds without flinching, had performed assassinations and overseen executions. She had taken it all in her stride. It was the waiting she had never gotten used to. The droning, stretching silence between battles. She had always been decisive, aggressive. Those were the qualities her drill instructor had noticed back when she was just a white shield. The very traits that singled her out as a future Kasrkin. Aggression had given her the edge to succeed, where other cadets had crumbled. But now the anger boiled in her blood constantly. She yearned to let it out, to slaughter the Emperor's enemies. And the Emperor has a great many enemies on Gavain. Alba realized, distantly, that she was gripping the pendant she wore around her neck too tightly. She could feel its sharp edges digging into her palm through her gauntlet's padded underlay. She unclenched her fist. The charm was a cheap thing, really. A tarnished metal eagle, hand-cut from a ration can, threaded onto a fraying leather strap recycled from an old combat harness. A cheap thing, but it had seen her through 14 years of war and butchery, through triumph and tragedy, and the greatest defeat the Imperium had known in living memory. The sound of boots crunching over rubble pulled her out of her thoughts. Auric was striding purposefully towards her position, a grim look visible on the parts of his scarred face that could still express emotion. More bad news, Alba thought. She spared a moment to kiss the pendant's battered edge, then tucked the trinket back under her padded gorget. She took her time, making a show of being unhurried. Though the recently promoted infantryman now technically outranked her, Alba, better trained and far more experienced, had been left in overall command. Auric could come to her. She let him mount the steep metal stair that led up to the overpass, then stopped him with an abrupt question. "Something to report, trooper?" "We've got the transport free," Auric called up, starting with the good news. Alba waited expectantly for the bad. "But it ain't going nowhere. Not without an engineer's attention." Alba gave him a doubtful look. She still found it hard to trust the guardsman, even if he had proven himself a brave and fierce fighter. However heroic his recent actions seemed, there was no escaping the fact that Auric's former squad had turned traitor. The rumors of the atrocities they had committed disgusted Alba, and just because the scarred veteran had finally found the courage to flee from his damned comrades didn't mean he wasn't tainted by their heresy. Alba had seen plenty of good soldiers lose themselves to madness and savagery. Not all of them had knowingly served the arch-enemy. Though the rest of the Kasrkin seemed ready to trust him, she had resolved to watch the veteran closely. When he slips, I'll be ready. "Can't be field patched?" the Kasrkin asked, already suspecting she knew the answer. Oryx shook his head. "Better if I show you." Alba scowled, slung her hail gun over her shoulder, and made her way down the steps without another word. Up close, it only took a glance to understand that the hauler was beyond use. The driver's cabin had been crushed by falling rubble, its armor glass windscreen shattered, steering rig sheared almost clean off. Worse, the vehicle's front axle had snapped in two, its jagged ends scraping the road, making it almost impossible to tow over any distance. Alba took it in and spat in the dust at her feet. Beside her, Oryx stood stiffly. "Miracle they got out alive," he observed. He meant Lint, the mission leader, and Vigan, who had been driving the transport, both riding up front during the crash. "Looks worse than it was." Vigan's deep, sardonic voice cackled in Alba's ear via the Vox link built into her helmet. She clicked her tongue. Vigan had an irritating way of always seeming to know what she was thinking. She turned a slow half-circle, glancing over the retaining wall where her squad mate had taken up overwatch position, giving himself a clean arc of fire across the entire crash site. She could just make him out, a dark shape watching them from behind cover, the drab-grey urban camo of his carapace armor blending into the shadows beneath the overhanging wall. She smirked as she answered back. "It's total, Vi. Next time, try to avoid driving us into a collapsing building." Assured and unflapped even amongst his fellow Kasrkin, Vigan rarely spoke more words than absolutely necessary. The stoic Tattershield answered Alba's sarcasm with a dry bark of laughter. They both knew damn well that it was Vigan's skillful defensive driving that had gotten them through the crash. Alba did not need to thank him for it, and he would not accept acknowledgement in any case. They had been through too much together already to need assurances. Amongst the Tattershields, it was simply expected that every one of them would do their duty faultlessly and die to protect the others. Alba was aware of Oryx still standing at her side, awaiting instructions, overhearing only half of the conversation. "All right," the demo trooper sighed. "Nothing else to be done." She raised her voice so the assembled guardsmen could hear her. After the hauler had been pulled free, Oryx had spread his squad out in a loose perimeter while he conferred with the ranking Kasrkin, but it was clear that the troopers in range were straining to listen in and failing to disguise the fact. "We stripped this one." She slammed her fist against the wrecked hull with a dull clang. "And load up the other. Take everything that's not bolted on." The veteran snapped to work quickly enough, but it never hurt to spur them on. "Double time, troopers! You will have that rig loaded and ready to run by the time the advance team gets back." Only Oryx remained, still hovering by her side. Alba scowled. "Orders not clear?" "They're clear," he answered, then carefully added, "But one hauler won't hold all of us and all the supplies." He was right, but that was a problem they would have to deal with when they came to it. "One disaster at a time, trooper." Within minutes, the guardsmen had formed a human chain between the ridge haulers, slinging ammo boxes and pack rations rapidly from hand to hand, while Oryx and his squad mate, Lesko, set about screwing a thin hose into the damaged vehicle's fuel valve, siphoning volatile promethium into a bulky canister. Alba wrinkled her nose as the abrasive stench of petrochems filled the air. She was reaching for her rebreather when a thought struck her, a suggestion of danger scraping along her nerves. Something's changed. There was something sour and sickly mingled with the stink of fuel. She glanced towards the heap of enemy dead they had made, the traitors' bodies piled together to make space for the recovery team to work. No, she didn't think rot could set in that fast. Combat instincts kicking in, she unslung her hellgun with one hand, while the other thumped the keypad bolted on her armor, reopening the Vox line to Vigan. It was unmistakable now, a foul reek on the clammy breeze, like a clogged sump vent. She spoke quick and quiet, questioning Vigan in the clipped half-phrases of the Kasrkin battle code. "Satrap," she asked, seeking Vigan's situation assessment. "Viridian," came the response. All clear, but the worry still nagged at her. Cautiously, Alba shifted position, slowly couching the gun stock into her shoulder as she put her back to the hauler's hull. "Targets?" Vigan asked, picking up Alba's concern. "Maybe. No visual." The demo trooper raised her rifle, squinting through her polarized helmet lenses, searching the dark for any target. Nothing. By now, the Kasrkin's purposeful positioning had drawn the veterans' attention. They paused in their work, the unspoken alert spreading down the line. Oryx's hand dropped to the autogun slung from his belt. "We got something?" he called. Alba registered his words, but ignored them, a distraction. Out in enemy territory, even a brief lapse of concentration could get you killed. But she acknowledged the possibility that her deep desire to engage an enemy was making her jumpy. Part of her longed for a target to kill. There. Something moved, a darker shape amidst the shadows, lithe and loping. It ducked away behind a bullet-riddled pillar. "Movement! South 05! Alba called. The Imperials responded with admirable speed, dropping their carried cargo and falling into firing positions facing the direction of the sighting. But Alba was already sweeping to her left, suspecting the target would try to scramble around their line. She knew that Vigan would be doing the same, securing their other flank. The two Kasrkin dispersed with flawless synchronicity, Vigan's actions mirroring Alba's own. It was a sign of their shared training, all those years relentlessly rehearsing the same precise actions, memorizing the same tactical engrams. Now they thought and fought as one. They could rely on each other, even in the middle of all this madness. After the God Emperor himself, Vigan was the person Alba trusted most. The running target emerged, scrambling over a ridge of rubble. This time Alba got a shot off before it could reach cover. In the momentary flash of las, she had an impression of rusted armor and matted hair. There was an awful bellow of pain, and then the body fell away into the darkness, crunching down heavily amidst the rubble. Alba glanced back. 5 gun barrels had swiveled in her direction. Behind them, the infantrymen watched with intense concentration. "Stay sharp," Alba ordered. "They're testing our perimeter." Even as she said the words, she was spinning on the spot, trying to anticipate the next angle of attack. "Emperor take traitors and backstabbing cowards." She looked out beyond the hulking shapes of the stalled haulers. Nothing moved in the darkness. Nothing at ground level. With a sudden flash of insight, Alba swung her rifle upwards. Dark silhouetted shapes clustered around the overpass above them, horned and inhuman. Arms swung, tossing dark canisters down at the Imperials clustered below. "Incoming!" Alba had time to shout. With a series of loud, glassy pops, a flight of grenades thumped against the ridge haulers' hulls, dousing them with sticky, alchemical grease that spread across their reinforced armored panels, instantly igniting in air. One of the canisters flew further, landing at one of the veteran's feet. Hala, Alba thought. Yellow oil splashed, and then Hala was screaming, flesh and flak armor melting away as she tore at herself in agony. She was dead in moments. Alba didn't have time to spare the trooper a thought. No sooner had the grenades landed than a braying war cry sounded and the enemy charged, leaping down from the overpass with primal, unnatural athleticism. Illuminated by the flickering yellowish flames, the attackers were revealed. Alba caught glimpses of gnarled horns, stamping hooves, and snarling animal faces. Beastmen. Alba had never seen this abhuman strain in the flesh, but she had heard the grisly campfire tales of the cursed Felgors often enough. Sickening stories that claimed their mutations were a divine punishment inflicted on guardsmen who had abandoned their duty to indulge their bestial appetites. "Form on me!" Alba took a few purposeful steps back, contracting their line, trying to maintain distance as the beastmen charged towards them in a roaring mass. A few fired wildly as they came, snapping off shots with looted auto pistols, but the creatures seemed to want to get in close, where they could put their savage strength and brutal melee weapons to bloody work. With movements practiced so often they had become reflex, Alba drew a frag grenade from her belt and shortened the fuse with a flick of her thumb, eyeballing the distance. She bowled the explosive underarm so that it skittered across the ground and exploded mid-bounce at knee level. 2 of the charging ravagers fell, bleating in pain, their slender animalistic legs shredded by shrapnel. Dimly, she watched Auric shout the engage order, and half a heartbeat later, a volley of lasfire ripped into the enemy. The headlong charge did not falter. In the strobing red glare, Alba quickly assessed the numbers. Too many. From the corner of her eye, she saw an infantryman, Pravio maybe, knocked flat by a hulking goat-headed monstrosity, who struck the downed trooper again and again in a blood-crazed frenzy. Alba ignored the horror of it, mind racing. Sheer faith kept her from panic while her training worked on assembling a new plan. First, even the odds. Amidst the confusion, her keen eyes had locked onto a fuel canister sitting unattended, where Lesko had abandoned it. "Make space!" she yelled. As her allies fell back, Alba held her ground, raising her hellgun, sighting down the barrel. The Felgors were almost upon her. She didn't flinch. A single bolt of overcharged las pierced the canister, and it exploded with concussive force. Trusting to the bulky blast padding strapped over her carapace armor, Alba withstood the pressure wave. The beastman, barely even clothed, did not. Flame and scorching wind washed over the Kasrkin, carrying the stink of burning hair and flesh. Blazing mutants staggered and screamed, bloated bodies mangled by the blast. Alba began to pick them off, but still more of the beasts were pouring out of the darkness, lapping around the beleaguered Imperial's flanks. Alba heard Auric shout a warning to another of his troops. "Tanist, behind you!" The enemy were all around the unfortunate guardsman. The creatures fell upon him, pinning his arms with inhuman strength, while another of their number struck him in the head with a heavy club. Concussed, Tanist fell, the brutish hands dragging him off into the darkness. Alba understood, all at once, why the enemy wanted to get in close. They want captives. She shot an uneasy glance towards Vigan. The beastman's charge had left him cut off and exposed. He was falling back methodically, seemingly unhurried, laying down steady suppressive volleys as he went. Of all the Tattershields, Vigan was always the coolest under fire. As the Felgors closed, Vigan calmly shouldered his hellgun and unsheathed the combat blade strapped to each hip. A horribly emaciated beast lurched at him, a rusty maul raised in its paw. Vigan sprang forward to meet it, striking serpent fast, driving his first blade into the creature's chest, the second up under its ribs, seeking its heart. The beast slumped as Vigan pulled his knives free. He didn't see the blow coming. Alba did. She yelled a warning into the Vox, but Vigan had no time to react. A huge brute crowned with curling iron-caped horns smashed into the Kasrkin from behind. He stumbled, ineffectually slashing with his combat blade, the defensive sweep mistimed. The Ravager knocked the knife aside and slammed its bony brow down into Vigan's face. Once, twice, and a third time, caving in the Imperial's armored faceplate. Vigan sagged, strengthless hands clawing at his assailant's matted fur. The mighty abhuman hefted the armored Kasrkin onto its broad shoulder, as though he weighed no more than a sandbag. Bellowing a command in a guttural language, it turned and loped away. Its ragged pack broke off the fight, slipping back into the darkness after their leader. Alba was halfway across the road, firing at the withdrawing Felgors, but with Vigan's head bouncing at the creature's back, she could risk a stopping shot. Alba watched them go, eyes wide with fury and horror. "Vigan!" Shocked silence fell over the scene, broken only by the fiery hiss and sputter of the blazing transports. Auric was on one knee, checking one of his downed veterans for signs of life. Lesko stood watch nearby, rifle visibly shaking in his hands as the adrenaline worked through his system. Alba didn't spare either of them a second glance. There was no time to tend to the dead. Vigan was gone. She had to get him back. That was all. "Form up," she barked. "We're moving out." "Moving?" Auric asked, incredulously, looking up from the slain guardsman. "We just got mauled. Hala, Pravio. They're dead," the Kasrkin answered. "But we have 2 comrades still alive. For now." She let the words hang unspoken. She would not allow herself to imagine what would happen to the prisoners if she couldn't retrieve them. "There's too many of them, you saw," Lesko started, but Alba angrily cut him off. "I saw animals, warp-cursed vermin who got lucky." Her voice dropped low, seething and dangerous. "But they're not the predators out here. We are." "So we wait for the rest of the Tattershields?" Auric cut in, feeling the tension rising. "Go after them in strength." "We don't have time for that," Alba snapped back, furious. "Lind left me in charge. I've given orders. If the next words I hear aren't 'yes, sir,' I'll put a lasbolt in your skull for cowardice. Understood?" Auric gritted his teeth, anger flashing in his one remaining eye, but he stiffened his back and gave the only answer a loyal soldier of the Emperor could give. "Yes, sir." The Felgor ravagers made little effort to conceal their passage through the ruined city, whooping and howling as they went, a sure force to intimidate any rival warbands into staying clear of their territory. Strung out in a loose line with Alba at the head, the Kasrkin and guardsmen shadowed their quarry, jogging through a labyrinth of narrow alleys and thick, rust-encrusted pipes. They would have to stay close. If they lost sight of the beastmen, they would never find them again. Alba silently cursed. "Where's Yaren when I need him?" The recon trooper had a knack for tracking moving targets through even the most disorienting terrain. As she ran, Alba listened to a continual faint hiss in her ear. She had kept the Vox channel open. She was sure she could make out Vigan's shallow breathing. Still alive. Still a chance. They jogged through the shifting darkness, boots splashing through puddles turned vivid turquoise and ochre with leached chemicals. Finally, they came to a stop, taking cover behind a corroded copper pipe. "Rebreathers," Alba ordered. "All times." "Don't need to tell us," Auric said with a scowl. "As thick as corpse starch." They had followed the ravagers to the lip of a cavernous cistern, a vast rectangular pit which reminded Alba of a mass grave. It held a shin-deep lake of scummy, effluent filth whose stench defied description. The entire surface seemed to bubble and seethe, alive with throbbing white larvae and crimson-shelled corpse flies. The scene was lit by sickly green fires which burned on the midden's surface, fed by venting gases. Bestial forms stamped and capered by the light of those filthy flames, howling and grunting in their primordial language, welcoming the raiders back. The throng of shaggy abhumans parted, creating a crooked path towards a looming structure at the far end of their encampment. It was a great corroded cylinder, tall as an agri silo, wreathed in rusty scaffold. According to the flaking yellow warning painted on its side, it was designed for storing toxic waste. The beastmen had made it their god, and crowned the makeshift idol with a jagged circlet of barbed wire. Alba tried to assess the tribe's numbers. Maybe 20, 25. She was not worried about how many individuals they faced. When the demo trooper reconnoitered a kill zone, she visualized it as a series of overlapping blast radiuses. It wasn't a crowd of 20 targets. It was just 4 well-placed grenades. But Vigan and Tanist were down there too. Alba could just make them out, being roughly shepherded towards the idol. That meant explosives were out of the question, at least until the captives could be extracted. "We're going to have to get in close," Alba mumbled aloud, mentally formulating a plan of attack. "When the Emperor puts an obstacle in your path, he doesn't want excuses. He expects you to smash your way through." "We'll never reach them," Roscoe began. Alba glowered at him darkly, struggling to keep her anger in check. "Not if we charge in blind. But they're just beasts, less than human. We can break them." She clicked her tongue, grudgingly reaching her decision. I'll circle round, create a diversion. You too will make the extraction." Blasco shook his head, disbelieving. He turned to Auric for support. "We ain't Kasrkin. It's bloody suicide." "Those are loyal soldiers down there," Auric answered, his tone firm. "We've got to try." Alba nodded slowly, watching the veterans with wary eyes. "I'm going to have to trust you." "You can," Auric returned her stare as he grated out the words. The determined look in his one good eye convinced Alba he meant it. "Then that's our plan. Go only on my signal." "What signal?" Lesko asked. He looked miserable. Alba's lip curled behind her rebreathers, the barest hint of a smile. "You won't miss it." Alone now, Alba crept stealthily towards her objective, circling around the cistern to a point where the towering bulk of the Tox silo would conceal her descent. The air was alive with buzzing flies and dizzying fumes. As she began to make her way down a swaying switchback scaffold, Alba recited her favorite battle prayer, looping its 4 words into a mantra to calm her pounding heart. "Emperor, guide my aim. Emperor, guide my aim." She loved its lean simplicity, just 4 words long. No fuss, no selfish request for protection. A true soldier's prayer. Composed by a soldier, not some cloistered ministorum priest who had never held a lasgun. "Guide my aim. Let me kill my enemy before he kills me. Let me save Vigan." She reached the bottom of the rusty stair and sank into a crouch behind her idol. Scuttling insects scattered around her boots. From the pack slung at her hip, she withdrew a melter mine, the demo trooper's most dangerous armament. She risked a glance down towards Vigan. He was only a half-dozen strides away, but surrounded by braying beastmen. He and the captive infantryman, Thaddeus, had finally arrived before the idol. "Satrap!" Alba spoke into a helmet's vox as quietly as she could. There was a long pause, then Vigan's voice, no more than a whisper. "Still alive." Relief flooded through Alba. He's conscious. That meant he could fight. With renewed hope, she set to work. With the sound of a dolorous gong, the beastman's chants and shrieked songs abruptly died away. A new figure had emerged from the crowd. It hobbled forward, body hidden under ragged sackcloth. In one misshapen paw, it clutched a massive, curled scythe, which dragged through the filthy water, leaving a foul wake. The shaman leered over the prisoners, tilted its bestial head, sniffing the air, scenting their uncorrupted blood. With a laugh like a hacking cough, the Felgor chose its first sacrifice. The tribe greeted the selection with howls of adulation, hopping from hoof to malformed hoof in delirious anticipation of the butchery to come. Gnarly hands grasped Vigan by the shoulders, hauling the Tattershield forward. He didn't struggle. He let them push him up in front of a filth-smeared altar, allowing them to believe he was resigned to his fate, waiting for the moment when their grip loosened just a fraction. That's all it would take. The beastman pushed the Kasrkin down to kneel in a muddy ditch, sloshing with blood and excrement. Vigan seemed to slip. Alba recognized it as a feint, but it came too soon. She wasn't ready. "Go," Vigan croaked into the vox. "No, no, no." Vigan dropped to one knee, body coiled like a stubber's mainspring. Then, with an explosion of violent movement, the Kasrkin surged to his feet, throwing all his considerable weight at one of his captors, knocking the Felgor flat. Outraged cries rose from the gathered tribe. Vigan lashed out, bare-handed, landing a precise punch that crushed another beastman's windpipe and sent it staggering back into the crowd. Alba's hands flew faster than she had ever worked, priming the mine, mag-locking it in place behind a supporting strut. She could not spare a glance to check Vigan's progress. It was the work of only a few seconds. Then she spun, stepped clear from the idle shadows, freed her hellgun, ready to mow down the beastman and rescue. She locked eyes with Vigan. A ribbon of greenish light, undulating like a polar aurora, passed through Vigan's chest with a faint sizzling sound. The Felgor shaman stood with its filthy paw outstretched, guiding the strand of witchlight. It lasted only a moment. Vigan swayed, slowly lowered his clenched fist, blinked in confusion as colour drained from his cheeks. That was the last expression Alba ever saw on her squadmate's face. The next moment, Vigan seemed to burst. That was the only way her traumatized mind could describe it. All at once his skin rotted away, splitting like wet paper. Blackened blood gushed. He spasmed, fell, and the howling beastmen scooped him up and tossed his carcass across their blasphemous altar. Alba felt an anger unlike any she had ever known. It wasn't meant to be like this. Had the Emperor spared Vigan from the apocalyptic nightmare of Cader's fall, just so he could die in the stinking plague pit? The doubt fueled her fury, and she surrendered to the killing rage. Her senses blazing, body driven by muscle memory alone, she levelled her weapon and stalked purposefully forward, firing as she went. Advance, kill, advance, kill. A gibbering three-eyed goat thing leapt at her, swinging a chugging chainsword above its head in both hands. She put a las round through the creature's skull, already strafing aside as the savage weapon dropped into the foul water, churning up gouts of rancid scum. Kill, advance. Just a few more steps would take her out of the blast range. An angry battle cry told her Auric and Losco had joined the fight. She had momentarily forgotten them in her rage. The infantrymen came charging across the polluted lake, spraying autogun rounds and las bolts, which slammed into the rear ranks of the jostling beastmen. Mutants began to scream, a high, appalling, inhuman sound. Alba roared her hatred right back. Satisfied that she'd reached a minimum safe distance, she raised one arm overhead, a remote detonator clutched in her hands. "The Emperor cast down your damned idols!" She jabbed at the activation rune. For an instant, it was as bright as day. As the glare died away, a wave of scalding heat scoured the dilapidated encampment. In the blaze light, Alba saw the Tox silo totter, half liquefied by the heat of the melter's mine detonation. It sagged at the middle, its jagged crown aflame. With a tortured grinding sound, the edifice toppled. The effect on the beastmen was immediate. Some threw back their heads and howled like beaten dogs. Some flew into violent apoplexy. One was crushed beneath the falling wreckage, too stunned to step aside. "Death!" Alba screamed, unhinged by rage. "Death to false gods and mutant filth!" Though the herd began to scatter, the shaman stood its ground, waving twisted limbs into the air as it choked out a string of phlegmy, guttural sounds that may have been words. Bile slipped from its lips, which ruptured and peeled away from browned, chiseled teeth, as though attempting to escape from the unnatural invocation. Underlining the words, a strange, shifting, buzzing bass note rose in volume. Crawling out of ruptured pipes and taking wing from every befouled surface, a vast swarm of corpse flies answered the shaman's summons. They flew in perfect unison, forming an undulating column that coiled through the choking air, then struck like a viper, punching down towards Alba. She dived aside, rolling through the scummy morass as a million insects entombed her alive. Covering her goggles, clogging her rebreather's vents, she thrashed hard, trying to drive them off, but they were tenacious. A thunder of autogun shots, bullets slammed into the shaman's side, sending the psychic monstrosity staggering. Freed of the shaman's direct control, the swarm shuddered, then dispersed, insect bodies ricocheting in all directions. Alba raised her head to see Auric charging through the buzzing cloud, firing whenever he had a clear shot. Behind him, Lesko had cut his own path through the panicked crowd to rescue Tanist. Alba heaved herself to her feet. She sprung left, then right, searching for the target of her rage. It found her first, lunging through the scattering veil of flies, bringing its rust-encrusted scythe down in a killing arc. Alba scrambled out of range just in time, but a sudden tug almost yanked her rifle from her grip. Panic threatened to rise. The blow had severed the heavy-duty cable that powered her hell gun. She swung the dead weapon like a club, but the shaman turned the blow with its sweeping scythe. Alba staggered back. Despite its ragged appearance, despite the bullet wounds riddling its rotten carcass, The beast was strong, implacable. She tried to put distance between them, scrambling a few more steps. Then her foot struck something in the water, and she stumbled, barely keeping her balance. Glancing down, she saw what she had tripped on. Like a gift from the heavens, the beastman's rusty chainsword lay between them, half submerged in the scummy shallows. The shaman saw it too. It bellowed, lowered its head, and fell into a full charge. Alba dived for the sword, cursing the bulkiness of her blast padding. Slow, too slow. She slid to her knees, aquaplaning through the rank water, caught the chainsword's grip, squeezed the activation lever, and heard its mechanism sputter, choke, then chug into life. Momentum carried her. The shaman lashed out with its great scythe. Alba closed her eyes. The pitted blade struck a glancing blow to her helmet, the spine-jarring impact causing sparks of pain to flare across her vision. Emperor, guide my aim. She felt rather than saw the scavenged weapon bite into the beast's hip. The chainsword's whirring teeth chewed through leathery hide and crusted fur, hit bone, and carved up through the creature's pelvis in an eruption of pus-riddled viscera. The monstrosity was howling, trying to pull away. Alba skidded, clinging to the chainsword's haft with white-knuckled determination, so that her momentum spun her around. The blow to her head had left her nauseous, but she forced strength into her legs and stood. The maimed shaman tried to stagger away, dragging its half-severed limb behind it. Alba rose like a vision of fury. She hefted the chainsword overhead in both hands and drove it downwards into the beastman's decaying face, putting all her might and hate behind the blow. A chainsword is not an elegant weapon. It leaves no clean wounds. By the time Alba stopped sawing at the body, there was nothing left but an unrecognizable pulp of meat and splintered horn. Almost an hour later, it was Yaren who found them. The recon trooper emerged from the shadows at the cistern's lip, auspex in hand. Behind him came Lind and the rest of the advanced team. They were greeted by a scene of carnage. Surrounded by Felgor corpses, Auric, Losco, and Tanist stood vigil over Vigan's body. Alba stood upon the profane altar, clutching an unidentifiable lump of flesh in one fist, daubing blood onto the twisted wreckage of the shattered idol. In stark, hard strokes, she had painted a triangular shield, split into fragments by intersecting diagonal lines. The Tattershields squad insignia, a memorial for their fallen comrade, and an unmistakable warning of what would happen to anyone who opposed them. Alba, Auric spoke softly. They're back. But she didn't look up from her work until Lind approached. When she finally turned, the wild look in her face made him pause. There was something in her eyes that the medic had rarely seen, a savage hatred and a glassy film of unshed tears. Concerned, Lind watched the demo trooper closely as he issued his orders, directing the strike team to collect ammo and move out, bearing Vigan's remains between them. As the soldiers carried out his commands, he took Alba aside, speaking gently. It's time to go, Alba. We'll all mourn when the mission's done. For a moment, it looked like Alba would refuse, but then her shoulders sagged in resignation, and she walked away, gripping her Aquila pendant in her palm. When the mission's done. Maybe then there would be time for something other than rage and slaughter. And when it came, she would need more, so many more, than 4 hard words of prayer. Some oracles find meaning in the slow, decaying orbit of a falling star. Some seers drag prophecies from the slippery guts of still-screaming sacrifices. But Rima Mashana's visions had always come in flashes. Every time she pulled a trigger, every time she took a life, she saw glimpses of the future in the fiery burst of her rifle's muzzle flare. For her, every killing shot was an act of divination. Back in her planetary militia days, her platoon mates had joked about her gifts. Got the God Emperor's eye, they'd said. when she won every marksmanship award and earned the right to bear the long las. The sharpshooter had laughed along and shrugged off the compliments, under the ever-suspicious eye of the commissariat and ecclesiarchy. On a world where dutiful conformity was demanded and any deviation was heresy, it was dangerous to stand out. Mashana had always known, deep down, that her gift did not come from the Golden Throne. Now that imperial authority had been overthrown on Gawain, she could openly embrace her true master for what he really was: seer, changeling, shifter of trajectories. The day that the sky ruptured, spilling purple light and madness, had been an epiphany for Mashana. As revolution and terror had spread across her homeworld, she had realized, for the first time in her life, that she was not alone. There were many like her, desperate for change. With that revelation, her visions, always hazy and ambiguous before then, had come into sharp clarity. Answering the divine calling, she had cheerfully climbed to the top of their barracks bell tower, long las in hand, and picked off panicked loyalist lapdogs one by one. She smiled to herself, savouring the pleasant memory as she watched her current targets through the same rifle's prey scope. Hidden beneath the shifting shadows of a camo cloak, the sniper was perched in the vaulted window of a long-since emptied ammo chapel. She supported the familiar weight of the long las in steady hands. A slender figure twitched towards the trigger. She was eager for another fleeting glimpse of fate. Not yet. Soon. Mashana wondered if it was her inner voice that spoke, or a whisper from the outer darkness. Increasingly, she felt it difficult to tell the two apart. She had willingly made herself a conduit for her master's capricious cunning, and he had taught her to trust and be patient. Death is coming, soon. She could feel the primordial truth of it thumping in her temples, could anticipate the exhilaration of taking the next life, of watching her victim's soul torn free of its mortal shell by a single shot. Down below, the Imperials were gathered around a battered transport, its hull charred black and pitted by what seemed like acid damage. It was riding low, weighed down with the cargo the troops were hurriedly loading aboard. They were grim-faced, speaking little, keeping their heads down, and they looked to be near exhaustion, close to breaking point, yet some amongst them stood out, outlined in roiling dark red auras, their souls stained arterial crimson with all the blood they had spilled. Kasrkin. Tattershields. They had carved themselves a fearsome reputation on Gawain, one that even the crazed servants of chaos had come to fear. But their legend would end here. Mashana would see to it. The vox bead in her ear came to life with a soft crackle. She closed her eyes, letting the spirit side fade, brow furrowing in irritation. Chalsa, do you have them in your sights? I see them, Mashana answered, masking her irritation. Chalsa was the brawn to their operation, the anvil to the skillful sharpshooter's scalpel. He was a moderately skilled commander, but he lacked, for want of a better term, vision. Too timid to embrace the anarchy that their master revelled in, Chalsa had sought to shore up his own power by sealing a pact with the bloodthirsty warlord Haravir. A powerful ally, to be sure, but anyone with an ounce of strategic sense could see that their alliance would not last. Haravir would cannibalize them all to feed his murderous ambition. Mashana saw it so clearly, but she could play the lackey, for now. Kill Haravir's enemies for him, and then, when he let down his guard, well, it would only take one well-placed lasbolt to free herself from the warlord's yoke. Perhaps she would claim Chalsa's scalp too, and take his place as leader, but only the Lord of Many Colors knew what the future held. Mashana tried to keep the glee from her voice as she answered, "Find your positions. Wait for my strike. We'll drive these blind fools to their destruction." Leaning heavily against the ridge hauler's armoured hull, recon trooper Petro Yaren took a moment to swallow down a mouthful of stale water from his canteen. The strike team had been pushing hard, combat primed ever since their convoy came under attack. The mission had turned into a headlong rush of firefights and counterstrikes, from the quick march laden with salvage supplies to the frantic rescue of squad mates who had vanished from their temporary encampment. Now, in this quiet moment, the young Kasrkin felt the stress catching up with him. But he could not allow himself to relax. Not yet. They still had a mission to complete, and now it seemed they would have to cross the city to their objective on foot. After the losses they had taken, their commanding officer, Lind, had made the call. Oryx's surviving veterans would take supplies back to HQ in the one remaining hauler, and the Kasrkin would continue on mission. An overnight stealth run through enemy territory. It was dangerous, daring. Despite himself, Yaren found a smile quirking at the corner of his mouth. He could never resist a challenge. But how long can you keep it up? The uncharacteristic doubt itched at the back of Yaren's mind. He tried to ignore the unsettling feeling, but he could not help letting his eyes linger on the shape lying between the crates on the hauler's flatbed. The lumpen mass none of them wanted to acknowledge. They had wrapped Vigen's body in tarpaulin, secured him in place with cargo stays. Despite the appalling condition of the brave Kasrkin's corpse, despite the risk of infection his already rotting flesh presented, they would not leave him behind. He was a Tattershield. His life of duty and courage deserved to be marked, even if it was only a few terse words from Sergeant Takon. Resuming his duties, the recon trooper swept his gaze across their temporary camp. Lurking in the shadow of a high retaining wall, the demolitions expert, Auber, stood sentry. She was tense, watchful, hardly moving, but to Yaren's sharp eyes, she seemed almost berserk. Despite her absolute discipline, she was unable to stay still, her foot tapping, knuckles white around the grip of the battered chainsword she had picked up from Emperor knows where, primed, ready to explode. Lind had placed Auber on watch while the rest of the squad loaded the hauler, and quietly given Yaren instructions to keep a close eye on the demo trooper. None of them would ever doubt her resolve, but the events of the last hours had shaken them all. Auber had taken Vigen's death hard. They had known each other for years. Yaren was the youngest member of the squad, and loss was hard enough for him to bear. He could only imagine how much more deeply Auber felt it. How much more ferocious was her rage. Gradually, the recon trooper became aware that one of the infantrymen, Thaddeus was watching Auber too. He kept glancing over to where she stood as he crossed the camp to collect another supply crate. The regular troopers regularly held the Kasrkin in awe, and Yaren was suddenly concerned that Auber's obvious battle stress would sap their morale even more than the setbacks they had experienced. Abruptly, Thaddeus began to cross the clearing towards the seething demo trooper. Sensing trouble, Yaren strode out to intercept him. When Thaddeus caught sight of the approaching Kasrkin, his confidence faded. He slowed, then stopped. Looming over the veteran, Yaren gave a questioning look. "Need something, trooper?" Thaddeus' face heated with embarrassment. "I just wanted to talk to her is all. She came back for..." He faltered, casting a guilty look towards the wrapped body in the hauler. Finding the words, he finished. "For us." Yaren understood. "Any of us would have, but trust me, this ain't the time to talk to Auber. You thank us by getting these supplies back to base where we need them." Thaddeus nodded, accepting the Kasrkin's reasoning. Yaren was pleased to see a determined look harden on the soldier's lean face. If we inspire them, he thought, if we give them hope and duty to cling to, we keep them in the fight. Yaren gave a wide smile, revealing his broken front teeth. "Carry on, trooper." "Yes, sir," Thaddeus answered briskly, turning on his heel. Yaren watched the infantryman hurry off to collect the nearest cargo crate with renewed vigor, striding around the leading edge of the ridge hauler out into the open. Then Thaddeus' body jerked unnaturally. For Yaren, time seemed to slow. Adrenaline flooded his system as Tannis' head snapped back, a pink cloud of brain matter venting from the rear of his skull. The body twisted as it fell, revealing a sizzling wound drilled neatly through an eye socket. The sound caught up half a heartbeat later. The deceptively soft hiss-crack of a long las shivered around the encampment, reverberating from the ruins all around, making it hard to guess where the shot had come from. It was all Yaren could do to stifle a yell of shock, turning it into a desperate warning. "Sniper! Cover!" The disciplined Imperials scattered, taking up the shout. "Sniper! Down! Down!" As they scrambled behind the hauler's armoured bulk or dropped flat behind heaped rubble, only Auric remained in the open, barreling towards the downed Tannis. In rage and desperation, the veteran swung his autogun in a high arc, spraying a suppressive burst of slugs in the likely direction of the unseen attacker. That brave, mad, damned fool! Yaren didn't hesitate to weigh the risks. He simply acted, lowering his head and broke cover, sprinting across the open ground. For 6 strides, he was an easy target. 6 long strides, out across the clearing, expecting a killing shot at any second. And then they collided. The recon trooper tackled Auric above the waist, crashing into the veteran with enough momentum to carry them both down to the ground. A las bolt jabbed between them at the very moment of impact. Yaren felt the beam's heat singe the exposed skin of his face, smelt the harsh metallic stink of scorched plasteel. The 2 soldiers fell in a tangle, dropping into the flimsy cover of a waist-high barricade. Sprawling on the ground, face to face, Yaren saw Auric's one good eye widen as the infantryman ran a hand over the surface of his helmet, now marred by a charred groove. He was shaken, but alive. "Close," Auric managed to gasp. "Keep your head down or lose it," Yaren barked in reply. Another shot snapped out, this one stabbing into the modified Ridge Hauler's driver side door. The infantryman, Lesko, now the only other survivor of Auric's demi-squad, had made a break for the vehicle. Narrowly scrambling inside before the sharpshooter could cut him down, he took shelter in the armoured cabin. "Casualties!" Lynn's voice, clear and somehow almost calm, questioned the scattered squad over the Vox. "Tannis gone," Yaren reported, tempering the momentary relief as the other Kasrkin confirmed their own survival. "Shooter's position? Working on it," Yaren answered, already reaching for the sophisticated Warden Auspex he carried at his hip. Working quickly, he extended the multi-scanner's sensor vanes and rotated the frequency dial, trying to triangulate the source of the shot. The screen crackled and fizzed with interference. Under Gavain's warp-torn skies, sensors were always prone to jitters and ghost readings. Yaren expertly cycled through detection vectors until the scanner picked up something he could use. A faint line of superheated air, tracing the trajectory that the deadly bolt had taken. The Kasrkin's eyes flicked up, following the dissipating line to its source. "Ammo chapel, southwest 01, 3rd or 4th level, maybe." Yaren's thoughts sped, rapidly assessing their predicament. The sniper commanded a clear view down over their position. At such range, they couldn't cleanly pick off targets behind cover, but the sharpshooter had them pinned. Yaren realized with alarm what that could mean. His eyes darted to the shadow-clogged roads fanning out from their position, searching for signs of movement. On instinct born of relentless training, he twisted the frequency dial with all the delicate precision of a safecracker, widening the scope of his scan, sacrificing bounce-back clarity for wider range. On the tiny screen, the swimming static resolved, delineating the flat plains of buildings and the spikes of exposed girders, mapping the environment in 3 dimensions. Between the structures, foggy clusters of mass were creeping methodically forward. Yaren let out a choked curse before he spoke into the Vox. "We've got multiple targets closing." Yaren twisted the dial, saw the fuzzy clusters, sharpening to discrete contacts. 15, 20 maybe, east and west. They would be on the Kasrkin in moments. There was barely half a second of silence over the Voxnet as Lind processed the danger and determined a plan. His first order was directed to the veteran in the transport, the second to the remaining Imperials. "Losko, take the hauler and get those supplies back to HQ," We stay on mission. The supplies, while desperately needed, only represented the strike team's secondary objective. The Kasrkin would not abandon the primary, not while there was any hope of achieving it. Can't just leave you, Losko blurted out, disbelieving, but Auric cut him off, angrily affirming the order. You heard the commander. Losko's direct superior in the strike team's ad hoc command structure. Auric's word was irrefutable. Losko's only answer was a loud revving of the hauler's engine. Be ready, there! Whatever Lind said next was drowned out by the sharp crackle of massed lasgun fire. The enemy burst into the open, a dozen sinister figures charging through the narrow streets on the Tattershields' flanks. They bore a brutal mismatch of scavenged Imperial issue armor, but the jagged symbols scrawled across their war gear made their true loyalties all too clear. The traitors had concealed their identities behind disturbing masks of beaten copper, ghoulish faces that leered, laughed, or snarled. As they plunged through the gloom, every shift of shadow seemed to give them unsettling new expressions. The cultist charge spurred Losko into action, and the hauler began to move, venting plumes of inky promethium smoke. At a shouted command from Lind, the Kasrkin scrambled out of cover, converging in the vehicle's shadow, using the armored transport as a mobile shield. As the machine picked up speed, Losko suddenly spun the wheels, swerving. With a squeal of heavy-duty tires, the veteran plowed straight into the advancing traitors. His voice swelled over the vox, vengeful and triumphant. That'll take a few off your tail! The hauler smashed through one group of clamouring traitors, kicking up a cloud of blood and mangled limbs behind it. Then the transport was away, thundering into the night with the survivors' ineffectual las shots scoring shallow wounds in its reinforced hull. Undeterred, a second group of fanatics charged in. Yaren killed the closest without breaking stride, firing his hotshot lasgun from the hip with impeccable marksmanship. The cultists were lightly armed, and despite their coordination, their inferior training showed in their sloppy dispersal, their imprecise aim. In a clear firefight, the Kasrkin could have made short work of them, but caught in the open in unfamiliar territory, under the scope of the enemy sharpshooter, the Imperial's position was untenable. They needed to find terrain where they could eliminate the enemy's advantage. With hostiles pouring into the clearing from two sides, that left just one road open to them. Yaren instinctively mistrusted the idea of being driven blind before the enemy, but for now it was the only chance they had. Lind had reached the same conclusion. Yaren, he shouted, lead the way! Find us a path out of here! With the order given, the recon trooper knew there was no time for doubt. Focusing on the task at hand, he dashed from the empty street, and the Tattershields followed behind, trusting to his expertise. Together they ran through darkness, las fire flickering on all sides. Yaren feigned left, then leapt right, making his movements as unpredictable as possible. They had run straight into another band of cultists, who fired on them from the upper floor of a shattered recruitment hall. Trying to slow us down, Yaren realized. To their rear, the pursuing warband was already catching up. The recon trooper dodged through a punishing hail of las bolts, ducked around a pillar and loosed a quick, killing shot before spinning back into cover. Reposition, evade, stay in the fight. While the strike team cleared the building with precise volleys, Yaren took a breathless second to check the auspex again. The deeper into the city they went, the more the multi-scanner struggled with interference. Yaren struck the device with the heel of his hand, twice quickly, the ritual of percussive maintenance that even the lowliest guardsman was taught. The grainy picture momentarily resolved, then vanished into static. Are the readings being deliberately jammed? Is it sabotage? That doubting, questioning, morale-sapping inner voice again. It's just atmospheric clutter, Yaren's rational thoughts countered. Drifting ash clouds could scramble signals, and the malign warp taint of the broken sky could deceive mechanized sensors and organic senses. But whatever the cause, he understood that he could no longer trust the auspex. Worse still, the city had undergone so much destruction in the months since the Loyalists had been forced to abandon this district, that the old maps Yaren had memorized were now unreliable at best. Buildings had burned and collapsed, highways had been transformed into deadly gauntlets by mines and traps. In this endless siege, every bridge had been demolished, rebuilt, and destroyed again. But Yaren had grown up on the winding streets of Akkadian Casa, laid out in intentionally confusing convolutions to disorient and entrap invaders. He knew how to navigate bewildering spaces, and he knew how a canny soldier could dictate the movements of the enemy, could block off avenues of escape and herd them inexorably into an inescapable kill box. The recon trooper had begun to suspect that was exactly what was happening here. Unable to stand for long before the Kasrkin's merciless fire, the cultists on the upper floor broke and fled. Yaren was moving again in an instant, and the strike teams followed. Lind, Auber, Auric, Gunnar, Senovich. There were so few now, and they were relying on him. "I won't let them down," he promised. He pushed himself harder still, trying not to drop his place while he assessed their surroundings. Judging by the spacing of the burnt-out towers to their left, they were running parallel to the due east processional, the quickest route to their objective. But that wide hallway would give the enemy a clear field where they could bring their greatest numbers and their snipers' longlas to bear. To the right, the road sloped up to meet a soaring viaduct. That way would place their fleeting silhouettes against the livid purple night. "Never put yourself against the skyline," Yaren heard the words in his first drill sergeant's voice. A basic maxim, one of the first things he'd been taught. Stress and exhaustion threatened to overcome him, but he wouldn't make that rookie mistake. Then, finally, he spotted something they could use, almost lost in the visual noise of ruins and wreckage. The sharp angles of a fortified defense line, a steeply sloping wall supporting a narrow firing platform all along its length. The modular structures were built to a standard pattern right across the Imperium. And Yaren knew, if they simply followed the barrier far enough, they would reach some sort of bunker or defensive strongpoint. Somewhere they could hold against the overwhelming enemy. It wasn't much, but it was their best hope. He signaled the squad, jabbing an arm towards the wall, wordlessly leading the way. "Where are you, Rima?" Chaucer snarled over the vox, his angry tone failing to disguise the panic in his voice. "The cult bleeds while you line up your trick shots." Ashana made her answer calm and conciliatory, but she couldn't hide her disdain completely. "A worthwhile sacrifice for the prey we'll bring down." She was sprinting across the battlements of a bombed-out barracks, camo cloak fluttering behind her. Sparing a glance downwards, she saw her cult brothers clumsily regrouping. "All you have to do is keep the pressure on, Chaucer." She leapt the gap over the next building, passing cleanly through the tall arch of a broken window. Without slowing, she picked her way up a rubble-clogged staircase. "Height," her guiding voice told her. "Vantage. The kill will come from above." "You're sure?" Chaucer sounded dubious, shaken by his first contact with the Kasrkin. They were tough opponents. Mashana could admit that. They had slipped the cult's carefully prepared net, but they would not evade her for long. When she had taken that helpless infantryman's life, she had glimpsed the future, seen the threads of fate pulling tighter around them all, into an inescapable snare. She knew exactly where they would run to. "I have been shown it," Ashana answered. She cut the vox signal as she burst out onto the building's roof, hefted up the rifle and peered through the prey scope. There. A flash of dull grey armour, a ripple of blood-red soul stuff, just where she knew they would be. A cruel smile split her lips as she lined up the shot. Yaren's heart sank. "Kill box," the Kasrkin mumbled, slowing to a stand, taking in the scene before him. A bastion stood up ahead, just as he had hoped, but the strongpoint had been broken open by heavy artillery. Its front wall was almost completely missing, and the ground before it had been blasted away. Their only route forward terminated in a deep shell hole. The enemy had driven them to a dead end. Nowhere to go. He looked to Lind, grim-faced. "There's no time to circle around," "Then we go across," Lind replied, his decisive tone not quite hiding his mounting dread. So ordered, Yaren accelerated into a sprint, leaping clear across the pit to the cracked ledge that had once been the bunker's floor. Crack rockcrete crumbled beneath his boots, but the platform supported his weight. He swept the building's interior for targets, but he was alone. Lind came next. The older Kasrkin dropped to a knee as he landed heavily, but quickly regained his feet. One by one, the Imperials leapt the gap, Yaren covering them with his rifle, hearing the enemy's shouts getting closer. All the time, the same worrying question repeated in his head. How long before the sniper catches up? Then the answer came. Slowed slightly by the bulky Voxcaster he carried, Senovich was last to cross. Breaking cover, he presented a target, just for a moment, as he leapt. A powerful shot stabbed out, threaded with incredible skill through the screen of intervening ruins, catching the Vox Trooper in mid-air. The bolt struck amongst the bundled cables mounted on Senovich's backpack, passed through plasteel, muscle and bone, then lanced out through a seam in the shoulder plates. The Vox equipment burnt out explosively, flames leaping. The injured Kasrkin landed badly, toppled face first, and hit the floor amongst a cloud of dust. His squad-mate's strong hands gripped him, batting down the flames, hauling him further into the cover of the wall. Lind was kneeling over him in an instant, unclipping the armor harness to reveal the blistering wound beneath. His other hand clutched for the downed Kasrkin's faceplate, pulling away the rebreather and dark goggles. Senovich's eyes were wide, unseeing. Then his pupils contracted, and he gasped, regaining consciousness. In this moment of distraction, the remaining cultists rushed them. They crowded the breach in their eagerness to fire on the hated Imperials. Fighting at near point-blank range, the heavy weapons specialist, Gunner, had been forced to shoulder his immense destructive melter gun. Using it at close quarters would flash-cook Kasrkin just as easily as heretic scum. Instead, Gunner flung a frag grenade into the rubble at the traitor's feet, the explosion mincing those who reacted too slowly to scramble clear. That was another maxim every Kasrkin was taught. Punish the enemy for every error. An answering shot passed within a handspan of Gunner's head, even as he ducked back under cover. As ever, the impassive trooper showed no flicker of emotion at the near miss, but Yaren's adrenaline was spiking. Heart thundering, the sharpshooter was moving in for the kill, confident that the Kasrkin were trapped. He glanced about, evaluating their position. Limited cover, no exit. Just cracked walls, firing slits, and a buckled, unusable metal staircase. And there, a partly collapsed section in the rear wall. Almost big enough. Yaren kicked savagely at the weakened rockcrete until the hole yawned open. Amidst a cloud of grey dust, he shrugged off his bulky backpack, abandoned his high-powered rifle, and trusting to his combat blade and the auto pistol he had scavenged from a dead officer 8 months earlier. He spared a last glance back at Senovich, saw Lind's steady, blood-stained hands as he loaded a syringe with combat stims, enough to take the edge off the downed trooper's shock. "I'll get him on his feet," the medic stated without looking up. "Go! Find us an exit!" Yaren didn't have to be told twice, and he didn't have time to wait to see if his comrade would live. Crawling forward on his elbows, the Kasrkin squeezed through the broken wall, emerging into a darkened alleyway. He froze. He was not alone. The cultists were fanning out through the streets, encircling their prey. While Yaren waited, crouched, hardly breathing, he watched one cultist split off from the pack to investigate the alleyway. Patient and predatory despite his racing heart, Yaren silently slipped his combat blade from its sheath, waiting until the heretic came in range. Without warning, Yaren struck, quick and quiet. Clamping a hand across the cultist's mouth, he drove the dagger's point into the target's jugular, then jerked it free with a soaring motion. Blood spurted in a great arc, and the cultist struggled, one hand trying uselessly to staunch the gushing wound, desperately throwing an elbow back to push away his killer. Yaren backpedaled, avoiding the clumsy swing with ease, and the snarling metal mask came away in his hand. The face beneath it was shockingly young, younger even than Yaren's, the eyes wide and full of fear. As hardened a killer as Yaren was, he felt nausea and a sudden piercing sense of despair churn in his guts at the sight of the boy bleeding out. Traitor, Yaren reminded himself, his lifetime of indoctrination overwriting his emotions, sealing his horror away within a cold, implacable cage of righteous certainty. A traitor dies a traitor's death. If the Kasrkin showed mercy, it would cost his squadmates' lives, and the lives of all those who were depending on them. Yaren stepped in close and drove his combat blade between the cultist's ribs, skewering his heart. The body sagged, limp and lifeless. Remembering his training, Yaren cast about for somewhere to conceal the corpse. That was when he spotted the lower rungs of an access ladder bolted to the wall. He followed the ladder upwards with his eyes. It rose to a slender sentry tower, little more than a mast supporting a covered firing platform. Flimsy as it appeared, it was the tallest structure in the area. Vantage point. He would make it work. He gripped the ladder, pausing for just a second. Once he started up, he would be entirely exposed. Steeling himself, he began to climb. Rima Mashana's heart was full of joy. When she'd put a bolt through that Vox carrier's back, the ruby muzzle flare had shown her how this fight would end. The Tattershields were trapped, and death was coming. It was only a matter of time. True, the cult had taken awful losses, worse even than she'd expected. And true, she had so far claimed fewer kill shots than she was used to. But these are Kasrkin, she reminded herself. Faster than ordinary troops, fighting at the upper limits of human performance. A worthy challenge. That was new, welcome almost. She smiled to herself, pleased by their unexpected complication. Her master revelled in twists and transformations, in the upending of order. She lived for moments like this, when she could bring the mighty crashing down in defeat. Through her scope, she observed the cultists stalking the alleyways below, ready to cut off any escape attempt. She spotted Chalsa, trading shots with the pinned Kasrkin. Ineffectual, pointless. It was pathetic, really. He lacked the patience of a true believer. But Mashana knew that sooner or later, her master's will would come to pass. She spoke a dreadful prayer, praising his cunning, turning her eyes up towards the churning rift that split the sky, the threshold of his dark kingdom. And she gasped in surprise at what she saw. She had been so focused on the ground-level firefight that she had almost missed the lone figure climbing stealthily up a sentry mast. Brave, she thought. Daring, but still a dead man. In a single fluid motion, she lined up the shot and pulled the trigger. Muscles protesting and lungs burning, Yaren climbed. His skin crawled with the certainty that, at any moment, a single shot could put an end to this desperate gauntlet. Just a few more rungs. The lasbolt passed clean through Yaren's calf as he hauled himself up into the crow's nest in a last mighty exertion. He flopped heavily onto the firing platform, biting back a scream. It was not the first time he had been last shot, and he willed himself to stay conscious as the piercing pain worsened, residual heat cooking the flesh around the entry wound. Now he knew for sure he would not be running any further. Now he really was trapped. Worst of all, the sniper knew exactly where he was. He had let the Tattershields' last hope slip away. Desperate, he cast around the tiny crow's nest for something of use. Nothing. No fixed weapon, no Vox, just a large mounted floodlight. The mast had clearly been abandoned for months. He doubted it would even work. Despair settled over him like a heavy shroud. "Sitrep!" Lynn's voice crackled in his ear. Half delirious with pain, Yaren almost laughed. "Situation report. We're dead, sir." "Carnelian!" he answered automatically. Wounded, pinned, out of options. There was a long pause this time. "Can you shoot? Still alive?" That was all the answer Yaren needed to give. "Then we'll do what we can. Tactique 4-4 Arrowhead." The engram unfolded in Yaren's mind, and he grimly accepted it. A desperate gambit, what the regular troops called recon by fire. They would rake the enemy position with shots, and hopefully drive the sniper from cover where they could be cut down. But against this enemy, Yaren understood that they would not all live through it. "On my word," Lynn said, voice resolute. Yaren readied himself, and then an idea struck, arriving with the sudden clarity of a vision straight from the Golden Throne. He shook off the hope-sapping doubt that smothered him. "Wait," he croaked. Then he explained the alternative. Below, the enemy were gathering for another push. Yaren ignored their mocking curses as he hauled himself onto his knees, avoiding putting weight on his wounded calf for as long as possible. Even the limited movement sent waves of sickening pain through the seared meat of his leg. He raised himself slowly to his feet, gripping the sturdy metal frame of the floodlight for support. He swallowed, controlled his breathing. He wasn't a praying man, not like Auber, who spoke to the god Emperor constantly, but crouching there in the tiny sentry tower, ready to make one last gambit, Yaren whispered a prayer. "Let them see me. Let them be slow. Just a second too slow." He shifted around the bulk of the floodlight, using it as a shield as he lined himself up. He never took his eyes from the building where the sniper was concealed, never even allowed himself to blink. He would only get one chance. Yaren steadied himself with a long, calm exhale. Then he snapped open the Vox and spoke a single word. "Ready?" "Good luck, trooper," Lind offered. One hand gripping the frame, the other resting on the control lever, Yaren stood fully upright, deliberately skylining himself. He caught a sliver of movement as the sniper reacted, faster than he would have believed possible, as if she knew exactly when and where he would appear. Light glinted from her prey scope as her rifle swung up. Too fast. Faster even than Yaren's extraordinary honed reflexes. He slammed the activation lever, desperately hoping it still worked. The floodlight lit up. The beam fell across the sniper's position, dazzlingly, blindingly bright. Yaren knew that death had come for him, but he knew too that his sacrifice had revealed the sniper's position. That was enough. A hair's breadth from his face, the floodlight exploded, pierced by the sniper's las bolt. It fizzled out in a flurry of sparks and tempered glass. Darkness closed in. From below, the waiting Tattershields opened fire, a volley of hotshot las rounds scourging the building where the sniper had revealed herself. Windows shattered, stonework scorched and flaked away, crumbling under the ferocious assault. Finally, Yaren took another breath, eyes readjusting to the darkness. He scanned the vista below, heart thumping. The sniper was still there, perched on the rooftop, face clouded with confusion. Yaren saw her slowly blinking eyes full of fading blue witchlight. She swayed, then fell, tumbling face first to the street far below. Yaren sagged back against the wall, relief spreading through him. His head swam with pain and fatigue, and for a moment he believed he heard the cackle of cold, malicious laughter ringing in his ears. Snapping back from the edge of delirium, he recognized the sound as a hiss of an open Vox channel. "Kill confirmed," he croaked to his waiting squad mates. "Target down." Below, Yaren heard running footsteps as the cultists broke and fled, only to be scythed down by the merciless Kasrkin. Some tried to return fire, but the shots were wild, desperate. Yaren summoned enough strength to loose a few shots after them, joining his volleys with his squad mates. Then he let himself relax, just for a moment. It was then, as his focus widened from the life-or-death duel to a wider tactical awareness, that he noticed a structure off in the distance. Rising over the shattered skyline was a jagged crown of slender signal towers, each supporting clusters of Vox thieves and sensor blisters. Centered between them was a massive transceiver dish, stamped with the bichrome skull of the Adeptus Mechanicus. A comms locus, Yaren realized. He hadn't thought that there were any left in Gavengard, not since the citywide network had gone dark months before. But the structure looked intact. He watched the facility for a long moment, trying to evaluate every detail. No obvious structural damage, no visible movement, no lights. Abandoned or locked down, or bait for a trap. A few minutes later he came limping gingerly down the ladder to find Lind and the others huddled around a now conscious Senovich. Yaren reported what he'd seen. "Thoughts?" Lind asked his assembled Kasrkin in the silence that followed. The night's experience had left Yaren on edge, paranoid, but he knew the prize was too tempting to pass up. If they could re-establish the Vox network, they could contact the Eastern Garrison without having to cross the city. His fears wanted him to give in, to shrink away from danger. Instead, he volunteered. "I'll scout it. If we can use it, we take it." The medic looked up and down. "You're relentless, Petro, but you're going nowhere until I've patched that wound." That was good enough for Yaren. He sagged back against the wall and slid to the ground, exhausted. As Lind set to work, that nagging, fatalistic inner voice kept telling Yaren they were walking into a trap. He made up his mind that he wouldn't let that stop him. Very well, he thought. It's a trap. Together the Tattershields would spring it. They would break it. And they would let nothing stop until their mission was complete. It is the last day. The day the atmosphere peels away, seared and blistering, driven before the blast wave. The day the Axelwood forests splash burn, transmuted into hurricanes of ash by the awful alchemy of the apocalypse. Today, a miles-high tsunami of boiling seawater drowns the high towers of castles that have stood defiant for millennia. Today, Cadia falls, and Mikhail Artur Barbovich dies. He dies as every true Cadian should, defending his home world from the arch-enemy. He is holding the fortress wall that encircles the Casa Ruse starport, turning back a rabble army of warp-maddened heretics, buying time for desperate refugees to scramble aboard every available shuttle. Throughout the overwhelming madness of the assault, Mikhail has been aware of a dark red smudge growing on the horizon, gnawing away at the sky. In his long career, he has fought across arid death worlds and cinder-blown ash fields. He recognizes the approaching debris storm for what it is, and he knows there is only desolation beyond it. In a few minutes, there will be nothing left to defend. It does not matter. Mikhail goes on killing, just as he is trained to do. As he fires, reloads, and fires again, his body falls into mechanical rhythm of slaughter, as though he barely even needs to be conscious to direct his aim. He can hear the Castellan's last words through his helmet vox, clear enough to recognize the tremble in the old man's voice. He says, "This is it, men. The last stand. Remember your training. Remember your orders. Remember, this is Cadia. We hold to the end." The order is simple enough to follow, even as the world dies around him. Mikhail knows it is the last instruction he will ever receive. He ducks behind the parapet, runs a field check of his carapace armor's pressure seals, adjusts his helmet strap to a tight regulation fit. "Remember your training," the Castellan said. "Remember your orders." Mikhail grips his melter gun tightly, as though it can stop what is coming. He wishes that he could help the doomed citizens or the dying comrades all around him, but he understands their situation too well to nurture false hope. All he can do is face death head on. Mikhail springs back onto the firing step and levels his weapon, seeking a target. Before he can pull the trigger, the storm washes over him, and the world dissolves into roaring smoke and flame. White ash coats his goggles, and he is blind. The temperature soars, and he cooks inside his armor. Soot clogs his rebreather, and he is suffocating in his helmet, struggling to breathe. Someone was telling him. Gunnar jerked his head around towards the voice. His glazed eyes came into focus at once, but it took him a moment longer to remember where he was, whose words he was hearing. It's not Cadia, he told himself. It's Gawain. It's not the Castellan. The Castellan's dead. It's Lind. Yes, sir, Gunnar barked the automatic reply, even before his thoughts had fully clarified. He saw the combat medic's concerned face soften, just a fraction. There you are. Sir, Gunnar fumbled for the words, but Lind interrupted, his tone firm, but not unkind. Steady on, breathe. Compose yourself. Gunnar did as he was ordered, and in just a few moments, his situational awareness had recovered. He could just make out the other survivors of their strike team, huddled with him behind a long wall of sandbags. They were in a ragged state, tense, close to exhaustion, their armor scarred and marred with field modifications. Recon Trooper Yarin leant heavily on a splintered leg. Senovich hunched beside him with his arm in a sling, slowly bleeding through the dressing strapped around his shoulder. Gunnar brushed rockcrete dust from his armor as he looked them over. No matter how bad things got, he always kept his boots shined, his melter gun oiled and polished to parade field standard. That, at least, was something he could control. "Does he brack out like that a lot?" Auric, the infantryman, asked in an ominous rumble, never taking his one good eye from Gunnar's face. The Kasrkin was aware that he made the regular troops nervous, but his fellow Tattershields did not judge him. They had all come close to losing themselves one way or another. They'd had to do terrible things to survive. "He's fine." Demo Trooper Auber snapped out the answer on Gunnar's behalf. Before the argument could escalate, Lind raised an open hand, then pulled in his fingers to form a fist. A silent command sign he had learned from Sergeant Takon. At once, the conversation ended, and the troopers were focused and attentive. "Yarin," the medic said at last. "Your assessment?" "Only one gate," Yarin reported, summing up his earlier recon sweep, "and it's high risk, I'd say." He gave a faint smile to underline his attempt at humor, but no one returned it. They'd seen enough already to know that the compound was guarded, but as dangerous as it appeared, it now presented their best hope of fulfilling the vital task they had been assigned. "Remember the mission," Gunnar silently repeated to himself. He steeled his nerves and forced himself to peer out over the sandbags, and once again look upon the sight that had shaken him so deeply. Barely 50 yards from their position, their objective stood out from the blocky imperial architecture all around it, dark and seemingly abandoned. The comms locus was webbed over with pipes and sensor blisters. Its domed red iron roof bristled with needle-like data spires, which formed a spiky crown around a huge transceiver dish angled up towards the tormented sky. A high, smooth wall of ceramite slabs protected the structure, interrupted only by a great metal gate stamped with the holy seal of the Adeptus Mechanicus. A cogwheel halo encircling a leering skull, half-pitted bone, half-polished steel. Between the gate and the huddled strike team was a stretch of open ground, like a long-dried moat surrounding an ancient casa. There were maybe 100 corpses littering that blasted concourse. Every time he looked at them, Gunnar felt his throat clench. He had seen a killing field like this before, on that last day, when the debris storm washed over him and the world dissolves in... No! Gunnar shook his head twice hard. It's over. Remember the mission. Some of the bodies were near skeletal, others fresh and bloody. Some were clad in Imperial Standard uniforms, others had defaced their war gear with crude spikes and horrible runes. Amongst the heaped dead, Gunnar spotted the curling horns of a beastman, the dented copper mask of a cultist. "They all came here to die," Auber whispered, her voice full of morbid satisfaction. "Don't think they expected to," Yarin answered carefully. This was an assault. They're scouts, maybe, or looters. I'd wager they didn't spot the defences. See, there." He gestured. The gunner managed to pull his eyes from the haphazard heaped bodies, following the sweep of Yaren's outstretched hand. Squinting into the darkness, he could just make out the point defense batteries artfully concealed in the slim towers that flanked the reinforced gate. Independent targeting, or linked? Senovich wondered aloud, already mentally piecing together angles of attack. Yaren shook his head. "No way to tell without baiting them. I'll have to get closer," the recon trooper offered matter-of-factly. "Not on that wounded leg." Lind shut down the suggestion at once. He set his jaw in a typical sardonic expression, sweeping his penetrating gaze across his squad's faces. "I need 2 volunteers." Gunnar and Auric leant forward almost simultaneously, and the infantryman could not hide his concern when he realized who he had volunteered to fight beside. For his part, Gunnar showed no emotion at all. After Lind laid out the plan, the 2 veterans separated, jogging off in opposite directions, carefully circling the perimeter. Yaren kept watch behind the sandbags, eyes riveted to the turrets with hawkish intensity. Gunnar was on the southernmost flank, mirroring Auric, who crept west. Forcing himself to ignore the scattered bodies, Gunnar positioned himself parallel to the ominous gateway, just out of range of the silent gun turrets. "In position," he croaked into the vox, lowering himself into a sprinter's crouch, ready for the go order. When it came, it was Auric who moved first, edging towards the gateway one careful step at a time, measuring out the precise distance he could close before he triggered a response from the turrets. Gunnar watched and waited, eyes flicking from turret to gateway to advancing troop in a fast observational loop. Despite his focus, he could not shake the sense that he was being watched. He knew, irrationally, impossibly, that if he dared to look, he would find the scattered corpses glaring up at him in accusation. "You could not save them," a hateful memory reminded him. Gunnar gritted his teeth. 2 hard shakes of his head. "Remember your training. Remember the mission. Nothing else matters." Auric edged closer. The turret stayed silent. Gunnar's skin crawled, and he mentally rebuked himself for becoming distracted. Ever since the fall, nightmare visions had been woven through the fabric of his waking life, always lurking at the edges of his awareness. Somehow he had found a way to shut them out, though it cost him terribly. These last 2 years, it had been as though he watched himself in a blurred, old picked feed, fighting, killing with the same deadly precision, but no longer truly there. Sealed in the bunker of his mind, he was numb, detached, but he could still do his duty. And that was enough. Auric took another step. Gunnar realized that he had been holding his breath. He let it out with a strained sigh, relieving aching lungs, and for one horrible lurching instant of clarity, he remembered the moment of terror when Mikhail pulls his helmet free and swallows scalding air that scours his throat. He lies face down in a field of rubble and shattered bodies. Limbs twitch, mouths moan helpless prayers. The Kasrkin tries not to see them as he gropes for his weapon. He tells himself, "They are all beyond help, even if they are." "Moving!" Yaren called out at the same moment his keen eyes caught the dull metallic clanking from within the towers, the telltale sign of long-dormant machinery awakening. Moments later, the turrets began to visibly pivot towards Auric. By then, the infantryman was already running, falling back towards cover at a full sprint. The twin-linked heavy bolters came alive simultaneously, spitting a hail of shells that blasted holes in the rockcrete, chewing up corpses, stitching a line of detonations across the open ground towards the retreating guardsmen. Now, with the point defense weapons locked on Auric, Gunnar charged out across the clearing. All at once, his intrusive thoughts were forgotten, irrelevant. Now he was simply a soldier with an objective to achieve. He got as close to the fortified gate as he could, trying to slip into the target system's blind shadow while maintaining enough distance to fire his melter without flash burning himself in the backblast. He planted his feet, leveling the weapon. Detecting the imminent threat, the point defense guns began to pivot down towards him. He ignored the closing danger, calmly lined up the shot, and held the trigger. 3-second burn, just as the manual prescribed. The blinding fusion blast ate a growing hole in the reinforced gate, completely dissolving the metallic half of the grinning skull seal. Gunnar ducked inside before the fissure had time to cool, his armor hissing where it brushed the melting steel's retreating edges. Shells pounded the ground where he had stood just moments before. Inside, the gatehouse was empty, lit only by dull red backup lumens. Gunnar did not pause. Hunting for the mechanisms controlling the turrets, he followed the clank and clatter of rotating bearings and automated ammo hoppers until he located the cramped fire-controlled chapel. Ensconced under its vault arch, embedded amongst power feeds and nutrient shunts, Gunnar found the weapon operator. The servitor was a wretched, corpse-like thing, limbless, blind to everything except the raw data fed directly into its eye sockets by glowing sensor probes. It twitched as the Kasrkin loomed over it, turning its head as far as the restrictive machinery allowed. "Ingress forbidden," it groaned through desiccated lips. "Lockdown, absolute irrevocable. Ingress forbidden." The sight of this mindless, half-dead thing, a living human reduced to nothing more than a weapon, filled Gunnar with irrational hatred. He fired point blank, spurred on by his loathing. He held the trigger longer than the strictly necessary quick pulse required to eliminate a prone target. 2 count, 3, until he could feel the heat building through his armor. 4 count, 5, letting the focus beam of melter fire steam over the body until it was nothing but charcoal, glowing white hot amongst the blackened tubing. Only then did he release the trigger and stand back to watch the chapel burn. The noise of the sentry guns outside ceased at once, and when the rest of the strike team emerged through the breach a few moments later, they found Gunnar staring into the flames, unthinkingly buffing soot from his carapace armor. "Hostiles?" Lind asked as he entered, his grizzled squad fanning out ahead of him with well-drilled precision. "Clear," Gunnar mumbled, at last looking up from the burning sconce. Alba, taking a typically aggressive forward position, called out confirmation not long after. In a matter of seconds, the Tattershields had secured the gatehouse and were prepared to push ahead. "There must be a control suite," Lind told them, "somewhere to access all that comms equipment. Let's move, locate and secure." The Tattershields needed no further instructions. As they moved out, Gunnar took a moment to check his melter's fuel gauge. It was dangerously low, and the Kasrkin silently reprimanded himself for allowing his emotions to impact his combat efficiency. The long burn had drained the weapon's pyrum fuel cell. Once that ran dry, he would be reduced to using his sidearm, a simple las pistol. The possibility triggered a rush of anxiety, but he locked the feeling away. The mission is all that matters. The squad pushed deeper into the lifeless facility, moving with the predatory synchronicity of a lupine hunting pack. Covering every yawning doorway and dim corner, they proceeded in close order, following a central access corridor. By the dull red lumen glow, they could see the way ahead was blocked by a pressurized bulkhead. There was a slow, rhythmic clanking, sounding somewhere behind that door, growing steadily louder, closer. "Something's coming," Alba hissed, from her forward position. Without need of an order from Lind, the highly trained squad slipped into firing positions, ready to meet whatever came through the door. Gunnar stood squarely before the bulkhead, melter raised. With a hiss of hydraulics and a jet of steam, the door slid aside. Beyond it, an orange hazard light strobed a silent warning. By the throbbing, fitful flashes, Gunnar saw silhouetted human shapes, amber-lit glimpses of barely living flesh and cold industrial machinery fused together with callous efficiency. Lind snapped up a clenched fist. "Hold fire," Gunnar fought back the urge to incinerate the ghoulish things at once. Discipline won out, though his flesh crawled. They were simple servitors, and though their mechanized limbs could be dangerous, they were not built for combat. They lumbered forward with heavy, inexorable strides. "Give them space," Lind said, keeping his voice level as he edged back a step. "Repair detail?" Yarin whispered. "To fix the breach?" "We're about to find out," Senovich hissed, pressing himself flat to the wall. The first of the automatons was almost upon them, staring forward with a trio of glowing lenses grafted in where its eyes should have been. Gingerly, the strike team stepped aside, clearing a passage. Gunnar held his breath, backpack to the wall, melter clamped tight across his chest. The servitors lurched forward, single-mindedly executing the one function they were programmed for. One by one, all three automatons shuffled by, unseeing or indifferent, completely ignoring the Imperials. The Tattershields relaxed, just slightly, sighing with relief. Yarin gave a terse laugh, Lind a wry chuckle. Then a strange high warble from the doorway pulled their attention, and their momentary ease at once turned to steel-sharp readiness. A servo skull floated in the doorway, held aloft in a micro-suspensor field. It gently bobbed across the distance separating them, almost bumping the canopy of cables that clung to the ceiling like black ivy. Abruptly, the flickering beam of a sensor field snapped out from an emitter concealed within the skull's eye socket, playing across the lurking Kasrkin. Gunnar stared at the floating skull, feeling his heart rate increase, recalling a blood-slicked skeletal face, a fleshless jaw full of fangs, eye sockets lit by flickering flame. "All right, steady now," Lind's voice, tight with a note of trepidation, cut through Gunnar's overpowering memory. "Don't make yourselves a threat." That was easier said than done. The Kasrkin, armed and armored to the teeth, exuded menace, even if they did keep their weapons pointedly lowered. They could only hope the automaton recognized them as allies. They waited, tense, until the sensor field cut out. For a long moment, nothing seemed to happen. It was Auric who saw the danger first. He yelled a warning just in time for Gunnar to dodge aside, as a piston-driven fist swung from out of the red-lit gloom. Summoned by the hovering skull, the servitors had returned. "Repair protocol override," they droned in unison. "Ingress forbidden." In an instant, the corridor was filled with cracking bolts and blazing heat as Kasrkin loosed their high-powered hell guns at close quarters. The servitors lumbered into the firestorm, oblivious to injury. One swung a prosthetic limb tipped with a squealing saw blade. Another tried to bring a flaring welding torch to bear. The Kasrkin's comprehensive training had prepared them for the terrifying claustrophobia of tunnel fights and breach warfare. The Tattershields held their nerve, unleashing precise volleys as they fell back step by step. But Auric, brave and blooded as he was still only an infantryman. He tried to stand his ground, emptying his autogun in an unbroken stream of shots, filling the air with choking gun smoke. Lind grabbed the veteran by the collar, guiding him back. He had already identified the most pressing threat. The third servitor came plodding forward with an industrial las cutter yoked across its massive shoulders. "Gunnar, bring that thing down before it lines up!" Order given. Gunnar dropped to one knee without a moment's hesitation, cradling his melter gun. "Clear the line!" he roared, and the Kasrkin parted around him. The servitor laboriously angled its las cutter down towards him, but Gunnar was far faster. The melter blast punched through the creature's chest, incinerating flesh in an instant, and eating away at the metal parts more slowly, but no less certainly. Then the beam died. A hint of a frown clouded Gunnar's face as he realized. Out of fuel. A grating inhuman groan pierced the swirling smoke. Though the cutter servitor had been reduced to scrap, its two grievously injured cohorts were still functional. They lumbered closer, leaking synthetic blood and coolants from innumerable wounds. "Still coming!" Gunnar croaked to his sheltering squad, efficiently unscrewing and discarding his empty fuel canister as regulation dictated. The closest servitor loomed over him, one arm hanging uselessly by threads of charged tendon, the other raised, ready to bring its cutting sword down. Gunnar, still kneeling, freed his combat blade. Melter or not, he had been given an order. Stop the enemy. He would fulfill it. His muscles tensed, but before he could spring forward, a storm of hotshot rounds tore up above his head. The disciplined Tattershields had formed a tightly packed firing line, shoulder to shoulder. With enough distance to line up their shots, they took the servitors apart in a final focused volley. Now the servo skull was all that remained, buzzing overhead with quick, agitated movements. It darted down towards them, tiny calipers snipping nastily. Jumping to his feet, Gunnar caught the automaton mid-swoop in one powerful hand. It took great strength to push against the artificial grav field that held it aloft, but he grunted, put his shoulder into it, and dashed the skull against the wall, hard enough to crack the bone. The calipers flailed, bladed edges scraping ineffectually at Gunnar's vambrace as he pulled back, striking the thing against the wall again and again. Finally, the skull's inner workings broke, sparks vented, and it dropped dead to the floor. Gunnar showed neither anger nor elation, his face blank as ever, at least until he noticed the condition of his vambrace. Then he frowned, making a mental note to patch and buff the squad plasteel at the earliest opportunity. "Makes no sense," Senovich announced, glaring at the data slate in disgust. It had taken the strike team barely half an hour to locate the control suite at the heart of the facility, methodically sweeping empty corridors and abandoned workstations. Now the soldiers were gathered around Senovich, the most technically minded of the squad, as he tapped at the rune board with the index finger of his one good hand. "Comms locus like this usually keep a complete archive of strategic data, but they've purged the logs." It meant little to Gunnar, but he stared with rapt attention as 3 words flashed on the black screen. Lockdown. Absolute. Irrevocable. "So all this equipment is just so much scrap metal?" Albert asked with a grimace. "That's just it," Senovich answered. "Almost every system is powered down and cipher-locked. But that transceiver dish is broadcasting. All bands, max range." "But what is it transmitting?" Lind asked, leaning in over Senovich's shoulder. The Vox trooper looked up, grim face bathed in the screen glare. "Looks like a scramble code." "Is that why we haven't heard from the Eastern Garrison? Because someone jammed the Vox?" "Could be. A transmitter this powerful could cut off comms across half the city. Whatever happened here, they didn't want anyone to know." Lind took it in, rubbing a hand wearily across his stubbled chin, weighing their limited options. "All right," he said at last. "Sen, see if you can disable that signal. Contacting the garrison remains our primary objective. The rest of you," he turned to the ragged squad, who snapped to attention despite their exhaustion, "sweep the facility, gather anything we can use." The troopers dispersed without another word, leaving Senovich to grapple with the unresponsive system. It took the Imperial veterans little time to secure the abandoned structure. They met no further resistance, found no signs of life, no clues as to what had happened there. The place was eerily still, its cramped corridors reeking of machine oils and chemical disinfectants, cut through with a cloying note of old incense. The last chamber they searched was a vast echoing workshop that occupied the entirety of sub-level 03. Beneath the dim glow of backup lumens, the soldiers found long-cooled furnaces and tool-bearing servo arms, workbenches piled high with tangled wires and assembled machine parts. Dead power cables snaked across the floor between overturned crates, their contents spilled. It looked to Gunnar as though a hurried search had taken place, a search or an evacuation. Before the workshops, the cavernous chamber narrowed, packed floor to ceiling with tool bays, equipment lockers and, there, finally, weapon caches. Alba gave a rare smile when she spotted the high-explosive warning stenciled on one steel cabinet. "All right," she growled. 10 minutes. Grab what you can carry." While his squad ransacked the weapon stores, Gunnar strode down the dark aisles, hunting for even a single pyrum canister. He checked locker after locker, passing over power packs and replacement plasma coils and more esoteric weapon parts whose function he could not even guess. His initial hope of finding the fuel he needed had almost faded when he came across an unassuming access hatch in the workshop's rear wall. It did not look promising, but the desperate need to secure ammo to return himself to full combat effectiveness spurred him on. Las pistol in hand, Gunnar pulled the hatch open and ducked through. Beyond was a square-sided antechamber piled high with junk. The acrid stink of burnt-out equipment hung in the cold air. Scrap heap, he realized, with a twinge of disappointment. He turned to leave, but something about the mass of charred wires and corroded pistons caught his attention, setting combat-honed senses on edge. Gunnar squinted, mentally assembling the disjointed shapes into something he could understand. Amidst the tangle of pipes and circuit ribbons, the Kasrkin picked out pale flesh and strips of red rags, tracing the lines of arms, a jaw, a severed hand. There were bodies buried in the scrap pile. They had been dismembered, but there was enough left of their uniforms for him to be sure that they were the tech adepts who had once staffed this facility. Gunnar's hand jumped to the Vox controls built into his armor, ready to call in his find, but he froze before he could open the channel. Somewhere amidst the heaped junk, a tiny red light was pulsing. Las' pistol raised, Gunnar edged cautiously closer. The blinking light was wired to a mass of transparent pipes and shrink-wrapped organs packed inside the hollow of a steel rib cage. Each tiny flash marked the slow mechanical heartbeat of the figure sprawled like a broken mannequin amongst the debris. Tech priest. Equally fascinated and disgusted, Gunnar leaned in closer still. The mechanically augmented body jerked suddenly upright like a sleeper woken from a nightmare, and a blurt of static rang out, shockingly loud, in the enclosed chamber. "Proximity alarm!" Mentally cursing, the Kasrkin darted back, just keeping his footing on the loose scrap. A shiver ran through the tech priest's tangled mechanisms. Tubes flooded with liquids, withered organs began to pulse and throb. Steel irises peeled back from 4 glossy black eye lenses, which suddenly flared with blue light. A waxy half-face turned to scrutinize the interloper. "Purpose and authorizations?" it queried, the words coming not from the lipless mouth, but from a voxcaster wired into the thing's throat. Gunnar frowned, edging back towards the doorway. He had held his weapon ready, but did not yet take aim. "Purpose and authorizations?" it demanded again, rising shakily on a rig of spindly, multi-jointed legs. The Kasrkin did not have a good answer for the priest's questions, but that didn't mean he had to be its enemy. Perhaps it was not hostile. Perhaps it could even help them complete their mission. "What happened here?" Gunnar managed to ask. The tech priest froze and slowly tilted its head, considering the unexpected question. It clasped its one organic hand to the side of its steel skull in an unmistakable gesture of confusion. "Data missing," it admitted, as a tremble of frustration rattled through its mechanical form. "Recalibrating. Retrieving logs." A series of sharp trills and static hisses issued from the voxcaster as the tech priest accessed whatever served as its memory. Gunnar stood his ground, watchful, adjusting his grip on his last pistol as the priest began to recite a hurried litany, a string of broken terms he could not follow. "Sit report final," it announced. "Observation. Global strategic situation untenable. Defeat certain. Prediction. Disclosure of data will trigger total morale failure, cascading to all combat-capable units. Determinations. Withhold data. Interrupt VoxNet. Initiate lockdown. Absolute. Irrevocable. Summary. No one must know." The rapid recitation ended as abruptly as it started. Then the head turned, ominous and slow, 4 glowing lenses locking on to the lone Kasrkin. The blow came out of nowhere. A sinuous mechadendrite separated itself from the tangle of cables, lashing out to strike Gunnar in the temple with enough force to crack his helmet. With a nerve-jangling burst of pain, his vision filled with. Crackling sparks and cinders spin in the roaring ash cloud. Mikhail crawls, staying down in a pocket of scorching air trapped beneath the gale. He is groping, all but blind, poring over wreckage and twitching corpses. It feels like a miracle when he finds his melter gun, half buried in the rubble. But when his hands close about the weapon's grip, the air is suddenly full of hateful, inhuman war cries. The tech priest shrieked in its language of static. Gunnar stumbled away, half running, half crawling towards the hatch. He could feel his consciousness slipping, his mind spinning. Fractured thoughts bled into terrible, long-repressed memories. Red robes melted in Gunnar's mind into scarlet flesh. The squeal of static becoming the roaring howl of the pyroclastic gale, battering Casa Ruse. No, it's not Cadia. It's over. He blinked hard, trying to keep the memory from consuming him as. Mikhail spins in panic, seeking the source of those evil, exultant cries. All around him, nightmare shapes stalk through the whirlwind of ash. Mighty apparitions whose flesh has burned away, revealing corded muscles sheened with blood. The nearest creature glowers at him, with a face that is little more than a snarling skull. A jaw full of fangs, a crown of black horns. It bears a serrated sword of solid flame, almost as long as Mikhail is tall, and swings it effortlessly down upon him. Gunnar dived aside, and the tech priest's taloned limb whipped by, narrowly missing its mark. The Kasrkin scrabbled away, ducking through the hatch and back out amongst the locker aisles. "No one must know," the tech priest repeated, trying to offer a rational explanation as to why the Kasrkin had to die. With a rattle of spidery limbs, it swarmed through the hatch, bringing a strange conical weapon to bear. The device cycled through its activation routine, coils whirred, glowing amber, then white-hot. The air filled with static electricity, sparks crawling across every conduit surface. There was a crack like thunder as the weapon discharged. A blinding beam of energy bisected the locker Gunnar was sheltering behind, sending its steel frame crashing apart in 2 neat halves. The energy lance sped on, slicing through several intervening walls before cutting out. As he leapt clear, Gunnar's thoughts raced, wondering if any of his squadmates had heard the blast, how long it would take them to respond, but he knew better than to nurture hope. He let momentum carry him to his feet, and he came up firing, burning out his las pistol's power pack in a single furious burst. Precision shots struck the armored casing of the tech priest's skull, sizzling against stained steel with a harmless flurry of sparks. The melter is blazing hot in Mikhail's hands, but he holds down the trigger. The blast eats into the bloody apparition's chest, a textbook center mass kill shot. But the thing keeps coming, snarling, berating him in a language of discordant screams that tears at his sanity. The disorienting static war cry dropped in pitch, a flat sound of irritation. Abruptly, the tech priest changed tactics, its clattering limbs drawing in tight, tensing, then exploding into motion. It charged the Kasrkin, scuttling over an intervening workbench with inhumanly fluid motion. Bladed limbs sending chunks of scrap metal flying. Gunnar dodged, stumbled, twisted around behind the next bench. Mikhail falls back, his melter burned out, his hope extinguished. The apparition towers over him as he scrabbles away over blood-slicked rubble. It tells him, "This is the end. This is the last day." Mikhail knows it speaks the truth. It says, "You could not save them. You cannot save yourself. You are alone. You are a dead man." Every word cuts into Mikhail's soul, prizing his mind apart. He knows it is right. He knows he is dead and damned for failure. He knows he is alone, but he knows other things as well. He is still Cadian, still Kasrkin, and so he will keep fighting until the end. Gunnar almost missed the pyrum canisters lying amidst the scattered debris on the workshop floor, not even a dozen yards away. He could scarcely believe it. It felt like an impossible miracle. He dived towards the precious ammunition, arms outstretched. His fingers brushed the cold steel surface at the same moment as a crushing, vice-like grip closed on the back of his neck. The tech priest hauled him back across the metal floor, out of reach of the canisters, away from hope. "You are a dead man." Gunnar kicked furiously, trying to get free. His boots struck only unyielding metal. "You are alone." With a whine of servos, the tech priest lifted Gunnar by the throat, squeezing the life from him. A pincer-tipped macadandroid snapped shut around the Kasrkin's gun hand, crushing bones. Gunnar began to black out, but his free hand fumbled at his belt, closed around a crack grenade. He knew the blast would kill him too, but he did not hesitate. He had been a dead man these last 2 years anyway. The mission, he told himself. That's all that matters. That's all that matters. He faced his death head on, staring unflinchingly into coldly glowing blue eyes. Mikhail stares into eyes of lambent flame and swings his burnt-out melter-gun full force. It takes a dozen blows to drive the monster back, but he does not relent. He is Cadian. He is Kasrkin. He fights. He holds. And at the end of everything, he starts to scream. A scream of frenzy and madness, and... Gunnar screamed his defiance into the implacable machine face. His battle cry seemed to distort, growing impossibly louder, blending into the roar of a revving motor. Gunnar was not alone. Alba brought her scavenged chainsword down in a crashing overhead swing. The toothed blade soared through the tech priest's neck and shoulder, all but severing the head. The arm went limp, and then Gunnar was free. In a blur, he punched the live grenade into the tangle of cables in the tech priest's gaping chest cavity. Then he tackled Alba about the waist, trying to haul her out of range. Realizing what was happening, the demo trooper spun them both, taking the incoming blast on her armor's reinforced padding. The grenade exploded with a dull whomp and a dazzling flash, shredding the tech priest apart, filling the workshop with a cloud of aerosolized gore. Bone and shrapnel pattered down on the huddled Kasrkin. Mikhail fights on. It could be minutes, hours, or days. He fights until the roaring storm blows over. The shafts of pale light spear down through the tortured clouds. When a figure plunges towards him through the red haze, he almost throws a punch before he recognizes the blocky silhouette. The Kasrkin grabs his shoulder. Both soldiers are so thickly coated in ash that neither can read the other's squat markings. The newcomer bellows over the roaring gale. "Come on! There's a shuttle inbound!" Mikhail shakes his head. His words come out broken. "Can't! Hold! Orders!" The other Kasrkin cannot read the name on Mikhail's Kassa tags, but she can see the battered weapon in his fist. She refers to him by his combat role when she tells him, "Belay that! We're getting out of here alive, Gunnar! There's your damn order!" Mikhail knows he cannot leave his post. He knows he is a dead man, but his body is already following the stranger's command. Together, they run for the evacuation point. Gunnar did not move for a long moment. He knelt, panting on the workshop floor, as Alba prodded the shattered tech priest with a boot. Its words had lodged in Gunnar's mind like slivers of shrapnel. Lockdown, morale collapse, withhold data. Dimly, he understood that the tech priest had discovered something so awful that it had shut down the city's entire voxnet, just to keep the truth from coming out. Whatever it was, Gunnar decided he was glad he did not know. Some things were just too terrible to live with. "The poor damned thing," Gunnar said, his voice raw, unfamiliar in his mouth. He shook his head, feeling an unconscious twinge of pity. "Saw too much. lost its mind. Alba said nothing to that, just laid her hand heavily on Gunner's shoulder and gave him time. "Damn it," Lind mumbled, gripping the Vox thief tightly. "It should be Takon. He'd know what to say." The Tattershields had reconvened in the control suite, gathered close around the bank of comms equipment that Senovich had finally mastered. The Vox trooper had disabled the jamming signal, and now, in theory, they could broadcast freely. Now they would find out if the mission had been worth all their sacrifices. Lin took a steady breath, preparing himself. Then he held down the transmitter trigger, and he spoke. "This is Lind of the Tattershields, 01 Kasrkin Cadre, Anvil Battalion." He let his gaze fall across his assembled troops as he spoke, feeling the weight of the moment as his words carried into the darkness of the besieged city. "If you read me, if you are still fighting, hear this." His eyes met Gunner's, and the words came. "You are not alone." Gunner held the grizzled medic's gaze, his eyes as steely and as sharply focused as they had ever been. "You are not alone." He nodded at the officer's words, taking strength from them and certainty. Whatever horrors they still had to face, he knew these words were true, and he clung to them fiercely. "This is Lind of the Tattershields, 01 Kasrkin Cadre, Anvil Battalion." The message sped through the ruins and empty streets of Gavengard, the first clear transmission the city had known in months. Rippling out from the great transceiver dish of a long-abandoned comms locus, the words were plucked from the air by automated vox thieves and relayed through grating speakers. Communication systems that had stood silent since the VoxNet died sprang suddenly to life, spelling words of hope that almost no one would hear. "If you read me, if you are still fighting, hear this." In a forward command complex 5 miles to the west, the locator runes abruptly illuminated on the control slate of a dust-shrouded Vox bank, and Lin's voice echoed down unlit, eerily empty corridors. When the words sounded over an emergency broadcast system in the miles-deep ruin that had once been the central hab district, the unexpected noise sent a swarm of skittering corpse rats scurrying for cover, leaving behind nothing but the gnawed bones of half-buried civilians. In the city's great central plaza, the Kasrkin's voice blurted through the tiny speakers of a Vox link mounted in the turret of a burned-out tank, relaying the message to an audience of charred skeletal crewmen. And just a short way northwest, the words spilled out, unguarded, into a listening post where traitor signalmen monitored the long, silent Vox bands, waiting with predatory patience for the hated Imperials to reveal themselves. Almost as soon as the message began, a frenzy spread throughout the heretic Vox operators hunched, spider-like, over their machines. One sprang from his chair, ripping free from his headset's neural plugs, screaming to the armed guards who ensured the signalmen never left their posts. "Fetch Master Haraville!" the signalman yelled. "It's a Kasrkin! We have them! Hear this! You are not alone!" Haraville's lip curled in disgust at the hesitation he detected in the speaker's voice. The need, the hope. Haraville knew that to hesitate was to show weakness, and weakness meant death. But despite the crackle of interference, despite the pathetically hopeful sentiment the speaker expressed, there was cold steel in that voice too. It was the voice of a hardened soldier, holding together through sheer guts and discipline, but close, so close now, to breaking point. Haraville snorted dismissively. It would not be long. The message had been repeated on a loop for several minutes by the time the Warbrand's fractious commanders had assembled. Now they were gathered around the buzzing speaker, listening as the message degraded, more words swallowed by static with each repetition. The traitors were a ramshackle group, united by fear and a shared psychosis more than any common cause. Their disparate uniforms revealed the factions they fought for. Some were survivalists, raiders clad in mismatched gear scavenged from battlefields. Some were cultists, displaying their dedication to their deranged creed with snarling masks of copper. But the dominant faction was uniformed in black flak armor, studded with razors and painted with ghastly runes, but still presenting an appearance of militaristic cohesion. Their leader, Haravir, had named himself Warlord of Gavengard. So far, none had been brave enough to challenge that claim. "The message is dying," Haravir growled. "Do we have Vox Scramblers in the field?" The signalman shook his head, carefully finding the words. "It's atmospheric. The warp storm started whipping up a few minutes before the message went out." Haravir scowled. He was still suspicious of the unpredictable power of the warp. He trusted his cleaver and the strength of his arm, not portents and mysteries. Unwisely, the signalman continued, pitifully eager to placate his master. "They've revealed their location, but I doubt there's many who heard that call but us. Fate's been good too." "Fate!" Haravir snarled, slamming his fist into the Vox bank, cutting the signalman off mid-sentence. "Fate's only good to them that sees a chance when it's laid before 'em." The signalman quailed before the chieftain's ferocity, shrinking back a step. "You've locked the source?" Haravir asked, his menacing tone making the words both a question and a threat. The Vox operator nodded. "Comms locus, Midacha district." Lips split in a vicious smile, Haravir turned to the honor guard gathered about him. He called them his marked men. Each proudly displayed the jagged lines of the 8-pointed star carved into their left cheek. They were his best, his most trusted, those who had been with him since before the fall and the rout. When things fell apart, these soldiers had looked to him, not to their ineffectual leaders, not even to the Emperor himself. They stood tall when Haravir swept his gaze across them, still just as disciplined as when they had served in the guard. "Call muster and whet the knives," Haravir told them, seeing his own eagerness to kill reflected in his followers' scarred and savage faces. "We'll see these Tattershields dead before the storm breaks." When Lynn stopped speaking and returned the Vox thief to its cradle, a heavy silence fell over the weary soldiers gathered around him. Every member of the strike team was on edge, their tensions made unbearable by the faint hope that their message might receive a reply, that they might finally hear from the eastern garrison. There could be hundreds of fresh Imperial troops still stationed there, or they could be dead or fled, or all turned traitor. The demoralizing thought struck Lance Auric as he leant heavily against a bank of down-powered cogitators. Ever practical, the veteran closed off that line of thinking. "Work with what you've got, soldier." Speculation did nothing but feed doubt. Overthinking only hurt morale. Instead, he focused on the present and watched the others cautiously, flicking his gaze between the tense Tattershields. Despite all they had been through, he was still keenly aware that he was an outsider, the only infantryman left in the strike team, a simple soldier amongst battle-forged Kasrkin. He wondered once again what he was doing here with them. They were damned heroes, every one, but Auric could admit that they made him uneasy. He had been around professional killers all his life, but there was something in the Kasrkin single-minded focus, in the cold precision with which they waged war, that made them truly frightening. As the silent minutes dragged by and no answering message came, the mood in the control suite soured. Alba was pacing, mumbling under her breath. Gunnar stared into the distance, buffing his melter gun with an oilcloth, lost in his thoughts. Yaren was perched on a map table, his wounded leg stretched stiffly out in front of him. He was usually the most optimistic of the Tattershields, the quickest with a smile. Now his silence and his grim face said everything. Auric did not want to be the first to speak. To speak would be an acknowledgement that no message was coming. It would break the fragile spell of hope that Lind had cast. Hope that there might be allies out there in the blasted city. Hope that their sacrifices would be worth it. To fill the time, Auric mentally recited the names of the guardsmen who had died to fulfill their desperate mission. Hala, Pravio, Tanist. Good soldiers, veterans all. He had lost comrades before, but these were the first who had died under his direct command. Burned, butchered, sniper shot. Auric forced himself to remember the violent endings. It was the only memorial he could give them, the only one they would ever have. But there were other names, other faces, crowding in the edges of his thoughts. Memories he cursed, soldiers he would have preferred to leave unremembered in unmarked graves. Roust, Charvir, Nemsa, the survivors of the former squad. Traitors. Absently, Auric ran a hand over the glossy scar tissue that covered his left cheek. A sharp trill and a flashing light broke the silence. Incoming signal. The entire strike team reacted, jerking upright. Hope and dread flared in Auric as Senovich lurched for the control board, flipping the switch, opening the channel. The sound that blurted from the speaker set Auric's teeth on edge. It was a squeal of static, like a dozen transmissions coming through at the same time, all horribly distorted. Amidst the skirl of jagged sound, Auric was sure he heard torturous screams and cruel laughter, and something else. There, a broken word, a fragment of a question. Tattershields, read! He dared hope for a second that someone was trying to reach them. Then Senovich dialed the sound down to nothing, wrinkling his nose in disgust. Hopeless, he announced. Might be a clean transmission buried in there, but if anyone heard us, they can't let us know. A voice, Auric said, soft, uncertain. Swear I heard. Lind shook his head, doubtful. I would like to believe that, Auric, the combat medic said, but it's only ghost sign. You hear it on Cadia sometimes, Yarin added, with none of his usual enthusiasm in his voice. When the eye is brightest, it's just interference. Don't pay it any mind. The mention of the Kasrkin's lost home world brought on another solemn silence, broken only when Auber slammed a fist into a wall, snarling in frustration. Auric kept out of the demo trooper's way, subtly putting more distance between them. As if triggered by Auber's outburst, an ominous gong began to sound, throbbing through the facility's cold and empty halls. Proximity alert. Something was moving close to the structure's fortified walls. The Kasrkin snapped into action at once, shedding their gloom and weariness like a sniper throwing off a cam cloak. Auric snatched up the autogun he had propped against the wall beside him, once again amazed by the Kasrkin's singular focus. Before he had time to couch his rifle and clear the breach, the Tattershields had fallen into a tight formation and set off at a quick stalking pace. Maybe, he thought, as he hurried behind them, they also preferred to have a problem to attack head-on, rather than dwell on their desperate situation. From the partial cover of a crenellation on the facility's high wall, Auric tried to count the enemy moving down below. The Tattershields were strung out along the battlement, scanning the wide concourse that surrounded the building through their rifles' prey scopes. Out in the purple-tinged darkness, skirting the edges of open ground, nimble figures in mismatched armor were prowling. The wide killing fields around the comms locus was already scattered with bodies, slain by the facility's now inoperable sentry guns. Those corpses must have given the enemy pause, or they would surely have stormed the gate already. But Auric could see their confidence was building. In ones and twos, the traitors were edging closer, testing the defenses. It won't be long. Auric sighted down the gun barrel. His aim had been better, back before he had lost the sight in his left eye, but he had never been much of a marksman. That was why he favoured the autogun. Rate of fire made up what the weapon lacked in accuracy. The shot came from Auric's left. He had barely noticed Lind's fractional nod, but Yarin registered the silent signal. Matter-of-factly, the recon troopers lined up a shot and picked off one of the scouts, striking the heretic cleanly through the skull as he moved between patches of cover. The others scrambled back, vanishing into the gloom before the hell gun's hiss-crack report had finished echoing around the concourse. A burst of wild return shots sparked uselessly from the wall. "We don't have long," Lynn said, as the enemy volley sputtered to an end. He looked at Yarin. "How many do you reckon? 20? "And plenty more coming," Yarin confirmed, gesturing towards the horizon. Oryx squinted, trying to pick out what the recon trooper's sharp eyes had already caught. Through the stormy twilight, a dark haze was rising over the ruins. Several wispy plumes of dust sprang out from north to east. Oryx's heart sunk. "They're coming in force," he muttered. "With that much dust displacement, it is either armour or more infantry than we can hold off, even from here." Yarin's voice was tight as he gave his assessment. Armour. Not even walls of ceramite and steel would hold for long against tanks. "We have to relocate," Lynn said, quickly adapting his plans to the unwelcome new data. "The enemy knows our position. We cannot allow ourselves to be pinned." "Then we just have to break their cordon," Albert said, peering over the wall. "Nothing to it," Senovich groaned bitterly. The injured Vox trooper was pale, drawn. The combat stims that kept him moving were already melting through his system. Now he seemed nervy, worn thin. Oryx was hardly in a better state. He ran his hand gingerly across his side, tracing the tenderness of fresh stitches from a wound taken on his previous mission. No time to complain, he thought. Not that he ever did. When you don't expect to live out the day, there's precious little point in griping. Only, Albert carried on, slowly turning over a nagging thought, if our message did get through to any loyalists, and we leave this position, they'll have a hard time linking up with us. "That's all right, trooper," Lynn said, a little of his old gallows humour cutting through the tension. "They can follow the sound of the firefight." The strike team assembled in the facility's gatehouse. Most were wounded. All had been pushed far past any normal limits, but they prepared themselves for the coming fight with cold efficiency. Senovich had strapped his injured arm across his chest, fashioning his sling into a support for the heavy hell gun he now wielded one-handed. Gunnar wordlessly bound the broken fingers of his right hand, leaving one free so he could still pull the trigger. Oryx prayed that Gunnar would hold together. He had seen the Kasrkin lose himself before, blanking out and becoming unresponsive. If that happened in combat... No. Oryx put such doubt aside. Combat was where Gunnar seemed most alive. Somehow that was not a comforting thought. Pausing with his hand upon the gate's manual release lever, Lynn spared a few final words. "Strike hard and don't stop moving. Remember, these are traitors, deserters. They have broken before. They will break before we do." Oryx swallowed, his throat dry, and adjusted his grip on his auto-gun. Then the gates were grinding open, and the Tattershields were striding forward, shoulder to shoulder in a tight arrowhead formation, laying down a storm of lasgun fire. They made it almost halfway across the concourse. Taken by surprise, the enemy skirmishers scattered, unable to match the Kasrkin's deadly focused volleys. Oryx ran beside them, raking the enemy lines with wild shots, hardly daring to believe that they might survive this audacious charge. Then a series of detonations rocked the ground close beside him. Throwing up flashes of flame and burning rock and shrapnel, Oryx stumbled, blinded by dust, spinning to get his bearings, seeking the source of the heavy fire. As the smoke cleared, he understood. They were too late. The first column of enemy reinforcements had arrived. Dozens of traitor guardsmen were pouring out from the adjoining streets, blocking any possible escape route, opening fire with grenade launchers as soon as they got into range. Too many to fight out in the open. "Fall back! Gatehouse, now!" Lind was shouting over the din. Oryx recognized the frustration in the medic's voice. They had failed to break through the enemy's lines. Pinned and outnumbered, there was now little hope they would survive the night. As the strike team fell back under fire, another voice rose above the tumult. "Tattershields!" The voice was raw and savage. Auric almost froze when he heard it. "There's nowhere to run, cowards! Stand and die!" A barbaric figure was shouldering his way through the crowd, gesturing towards the facility with a great notched cleaver. He was broad-shouldered and brutish. His imperial-issue fatigues now dyed deep red with gore. Though his face was almost unrecognizable, beneath the half-healed gashes of scarification scrawled across his cheeks and forehead, the voice was unmistakable. Auric had heard it every day for almost a year, the worst of his life, when his world was seized first by panic, then rioting, then civil war, as news of Cada's fall filtered in. It was the voice of his former sergeant. "Haravir!" Auric rasped out the name, full of loathing. A chorus of ferocious cheers answered the chieftain's speech. He was whipping his ragged forces into a frenzy, building courage to launch a full assault. Auric had been sent to put down revolts in the past, had seen how quickly a crowd could turn feral, and blunt as they were, he knew how persuasive Haravir's words could be. His rage and arrogance was infectious. Every instinct told Auric to turn and fight, to tear the traitor chieftain limb from limb. No, he was no brawler. He was a soldier, a guardsman, and he had his orders. He fell back through the gateway moments before it slammed shut. In the darkness of the gatehouse, Auric slumped against a wall, shaking with rage. Lind fixed him with a curious, piercing look. The medic missed nothing, but he let Auric's agitation pass for now. He was too busy thinking out loud, giving his troops a task to focus on, to stop them dwelling on the defeat they had just suffered. "That route is closed. Alternative proposals, now!" At once, the ragged Kasrkin began to plan a final stand within the comms locus. Auric was still unused to the Tattershields' methods. The way they shared opinions, debated strategy. It cut against the ingrained obedience that was drilled into most militarum personnel. Questioning orders would get you executed, thrown. Even interrupting the wrong officer could get you shot. Auric tried to adjust his way of thinking. "The traitor chieftain, I know him," Auric admitted. Silence fell, and the whole squad leveled their intimidating attention on the infantryman. "He was my old sergeant, back before..." He trailed off, glancing down at his boots in disgrace. Auber laughed darkly. "Maybe you can go back out there and rejoin your old comrades," she spat. Auric wheeled on her, flashing anger replacing the shame in his one good eye. "I'd sooner die," he snarled back. "We didn't set out to betray no oaths. We was trained to follow orders, understand? So that's what we did. And by the time I thought to question them, we were in deep in the blood and the darkness." Auric was panting, hands clenched into fists. Auber held his gaze, unflinching, her posture shifting subtly into a ready stance, in case they came to blows. But it was Gunnar who spoke up, interrupting the confrontation. His voice was a low croak, as though every word cost him. "None of us got here without doing terrible things." He nodded slowly to Auric, and the infantryman felt the fury drain out of him. He sagged back against the wall, numb. This time, Lind pressed him. "Auric?" When the infantryman gave no response, the Kasrkin barked loud and clear. "Attention, trooper!" That pulled Auric back from the brink. He snapped up, thoughts returning to the present. "Get on with it, soldier." "Sir!" "You know the enemy," Lind said. "Maybe that gives us an edge we can exploit." Auric thought for a moment. "We can open the gate." Disbelieving silence greeted the statement, but Auric felt a growing confidence when Lind took the suggestion seriously. "Explain." "It's Haravir. He's aggressive, impatient, and he don't care for the many commands. Believe it." The hate in his voice when he said those words was enough to convince everyone, even Auber. Still, Lind was skeptical. "I've seen heretics go mad with frenzy, but those out there still have discipline. They won't be baited. It's too obvious a trap." "With respect, "You're dead wrong." It took courage to contradict the Kasrkin, but the more Auric considered it, the more certain he felt. "We opened the gates, and he'll have to attack. If he hesitates, he's showing weakness in front of his followers." Lind dragged a hand down his silver-stubbled chin, weighing the infantryman's words. "We have no good options," he said finally, "so we make do with what we have." Under Lind's instructions, they formed 2 fire teams. Auric, Gunnar and Alba, the least injured members of the squad, made up the front line, crouched low behind the stanchions supporting the gateway house. The remaining Kasrkin were positioned against the rear wall, holding the chamber's only other exit in case they had to fall back. "When we fall back," Auric thought with resignation. At a word from Lind, Auric pulled the release lever. The gate ground open, yawning wide to tempt the attackers. Hidden in the darkness, the Tattershields watched the enemy intently. They strutted and milled out on the concourse, mocking the defenders with crazed chants and war cries as they drew up into formations, preparing for the assault. In those last tense stretching minutes, Auric turned to Alba, speaking softly, guardedly. "I know you think I'm tainted by what they've done," he told her. "Think I'm cursed, maybe. Don't blame you. Half believed that myself, but—" Alba cut him off with a frustrated click of her tongue. "I've seen enough by now to know you're no traitor," she shrugged, matter of fact. "But you're no Kasrkin either. You're our weak link." She looked him dead in the eye. "So don't break." Before Auric could find words to respond, an exultant roar rose from the enemy ranks. They charged headlong, bellowing. No lance-fire jabbed from the darkened gatehouse to repel the closing traitors, not until the front-runners were within a few yards of the doorway. Then Alba barreled out of the shadows to meet them, chainsword revving, swinging the weapon in a 2-handed grip. In 2 strides she was amongst them. The Kasrkin planted her feet, whipping the sword around her. A heretic fell backwards, blood gushing from the stump of a knee. A severed hand hit the ground, clutching a still-firing auto-pistol. The traitor's nerve broke a few seconds later. As they scrambled away, Alba disengaged, taking 2 long strides backwards. When she withdrew, Auric and Gunnar emerged at her sides, only now opening fire, punishing the fleeing traitors. None of them made it back to their lines. In lockstep, the Imperials fell back to the gatehouse, safe behind cover before the enemy's return fire began to scour the gateway. Auric gave a rough laugh, exulting in their small victory. He risked a glance around the stanchion. The heretics were clamouring, massing like an insect swarm. Though the first wave had broken, traitor reinforcements were arriving all the time, drawn by the promise of glory. They all knew that whoever slew the Tattershields would secure a fearsome reputation. Moments later, they charged again, plunging into a hail of merciless, precise las fire. But still more came, vaulting over the corpses of the fallen, brandishing knives and makeshift weapons. Traitor grenades detonated around the gateway, callously blowing apart any cultist nearby, but forcing the defenders to fall back. Searing flames and choking smoke spread through the gatehouse, but still Auric refused to retreat. He kept firing even as shrapnel gouged his flak armor, firing until he had emptied his ammo belt, shell casings clattering around his widely planted boots. He realized he was screaming, both in rage and pain, his hoarse voice booming amidst the din of the vicious firefight. Then the enemy broke through, trampling their injured allies, and the battle became a nightmarish close-quarters fight. Resolute Kasrkin met blood-crazed cultists with combat blades and armoured fists, and Auric jabbed with his bayonet, entirely focused on the task of killing each man who stood in front of him. Ripping his bayonet from one howling heretic's belly, he looked up into the face he recognized, a face he hated. Charvir. The traitor recognized him too, and for the briefest fraction of an instant, both men hesitated. Auric had dreaded this moment, wished for it never to come with almost as much fervour as he had prayed for the opportunity to take revenge. 2 images of the same man hovered simultaneously in Auric's mind. One was a fresh-faced recruit, laughing as he shuffled a tattered deck of cards by a campfire. The other, a vision of horror. Charvier's cruel grin as he gunned down starving civilians outside the food silos in Patara district. Oryx shook off his shock, consumed by loathing, and plunged his bayonet through Charvier's throat, tearing out an artery in a welter of gore. Close behind him came Roust and Nemsa. They had always been inseparable, two of the coldest killers Oryx had known. Oryx fought down his panic, pushed through the pain, focused on the killing. Roust swung for him with a hatchet. Nemesar raised an auto pistol. Oryx made a choice, pivoted, struck. He pinned Nemsar to the wall with a bayonet thrust and took the hatchet blow to the back. Felt his flak armor crack but hold. Ripping the pistol from Nemsar's lifeless fingers, Oryx spun and fired, and Roust fell. Oryx was panting, feral. It took him a moment to realize there were no more enemies standing, only himself and 5 blood-spattered Kasrkin. Oryx caught Auber's eyes. "The ones who betrayed you?" She asked the question with a slow nod that told him she already knew the answer. She understood the rage that grief could drive even the most disciplined soldiers to. "Don't you mean old comrades?" he answered her, grimacing. "No," she said simply, a scrap of sympathy, an ounce of respect. He had earned that. Her unexpected words cut through his fury, and he saw the situation with new clarity. "He sent his best," he mumbled, then repeated it louder so the Kasrkin could hear. "He sent his best to claim our heads for him." It was Yaren who caught on first. "He's fully committed. Thinks he's got our backs to the wall," the recon trooper said, and Lind finished the thought. "So maybe we have a chance to throw him off balance." Lind set his jaw, looked from face to face. Silently, they all nodded their agreement. "Tattershields," the medic addressed them, raising his voice in a steely command. "On me! Tacticae 6-6 Corvus!" The Kasrkin understood the coded tactical engram at once, but Oryx threw Lind a quizzical look. Lind explained the doctrine with a wry smile. "Countercharge, wedge formation, reform to circle, and damn well hold until the end. Victory or death." They took only a moment to prepare themselves, fixing faceplates in place, checking armor seals. Oryx felt strangely detached, knowing he was about to die. But there was a kind of comfort in dying beside soldiers like the Tattershields. "Emperor, guide our aim." Auber's voice was muffled by her rebreather. Oryx mumbled a prayer right along with her, heard Senovich do the same, and then they were charging out from the burning gateway, ribbons of flame licking their armor, ruby-red hotshots jabbing from their rifles. Taken by surprise, the closest knot of traitors was cut apart in moments. The Tattershields pushed forward, trampling the enemy dead as though slogging through deep snow. Stumbling a few steps behind the Kasrkin, picking off any heretics who got in close, Oryx searched the crowd until he sighted the enemy warlord. Haravir was wading through the traitor ranks, urging his soldiers to stand and fight, hacking wildly at any who tried to flee past him. With a fierce war cry, Haravir accelerated into a headlong charge. The most frenzied of his followers came with him, carried on a wave of madness and momentum. Oryx could see that in moments they would crash into the Kasrkin flank. He launched himself forward to intercept the warlord, firing his scavenged auto pistol as he came. His first shot winged a shrieking cultist in a bestial mask. His second felled a raider armed with a length of heavy chain. And then Haravir was looming ahead of him, a feral smile of recognition crossing his scarred face. Oryx levelled his pistol. Haravir swung his vicious cleaver. The warlord was stronger, faster. The hefty blade dug a great gash out of Oryx's bicep, jerking the auto pistol from his grasp. The guardsman staggered, raising his fists, ready to continue the fight barehanded. "Oryx!" the chief yelled over the din of battle. "Wondered if I'd get the chance to skin you, you backstabbing." He never finished the sentence. Oryx jabbed, driving his fist into the chieftain's face. "You dare call me backstabber, you oath-breaking filth!" Auric felt an indescribable rage burning in his blood. The scarred side of his face throbbed with every heartbeat, reminding him of the dark symbol that had once been cut into his flesh before he fled from his old comrades and burned the cursed mark away. Hatred filled him, a primal voice telling him to rip, tear, kill, maim. Auric lunged forward with a savage roar, going for his old sergeant's throat like a wild animal. And then he saw the same insane bloodlust in Haravir's gleaming eyes, and it sickened him, sobered him. He was no rabid beast. He was a guardsman, a veteran. At the last moment, Auric managed to check his momentum, narrowly avoiding a deadly swing of Haravir's cleaver. No distractions. Get on with the damn job, soldier! Auric darted aside, drove his fist into Haravir's ribs, once, twice. The warlord took the blows and answered with a kick that buckled Auric's knee. The guardsman stumbled. Haravir gave no time to recover, driving the butt of his cleaver into Auric's face. The veteran fell, blood gushing from his nose. Haravir's massive fist closed around his throat, tilting up his chin. "No stomach for it. That's your problem." The warlord grinned down. "But you were a damned good killer in your time." The cleaver came to rest lightly on Auric's face. "You've already been one of us, and you wear the jagged star again before you die." Haravir carved a deep gash across Auric's cheek. Blood flowed, but Auric let the pain come, let Haravir believe he had him. He had learned something from the Kasrkin's merciless coldness, the way they would sacrifice anything in a heartbeat to complete their mission. If his suffering could buy the Tattershields just a few more moments. As Haravir raised the cleaver once more, Auric threw himself aside, lunging for the auto-pistol, which lay where he dropped it just a few yards away. He managed to get his fingers around the weapon's grip before Haravir's boot descended, pinning his wrist. The warlord laughed with disdain, so consumed by bloodlust, so completely focused on his prey, that he had lost sight of the battle raging around him. Auric had not. The infantryman threw an arm across his face to shield his one good eye. Blinding light and searing heat washed over him, and then Haravir was screaming, staggering backwards, body dissolving in flame. Risking a glance over his shoulder, Auric confirmed the source of his salvation. It was Gunnar, calmly striding out of formation just long enough to strike down the warlord with a precise blast of melter fire. Auric almost laughed in relief, until a monstrous howl pulled his attention. Haravir was not quite dead. Appallingly burned, but driven on by some unnatural primal hatred, he lunged for them, little more than a charred cadaver trailing flames. Auric snapped up his pistol and fired the last round in the clip. The shot punched through Haravir's scarred cheek and blew a gaping wound in the back of his shaven skull. The warlord fell and did not rise again. Auric felt dizzy, nauseous from pain, exhaustion, and elation. There was no time to suffer or to celebrate. Gunnar's strong hand caught Auric under the arm, hauling him up, dragging him wordlessly into formation. "On your feet, soldier!" Auric stood shoulder to shoulder with the surrounded Kasrkin. Though they still fought on, he could see that the situation was hopeless. Haravir was dead, but the heretics kept fighting in a belligerent frenzy. They all wanted to be the one to end the Tattershields' legend. The ground was littered with traitors dead. They were still too many in the field to overcome. It was only a matter of time. A high whistling noise cut through the din of battle. Recognizing the sound of incoming artillery fire, Auric ducked low, gritted his teeth. He waited for the shock, the pain, and the darkness to take him, but the rocket struck amidst a mass of traitors, sending up a great gout of flame and chunks of ruined bodies. In confusion, Auric watched a line of detonations roll through the tightly packed enemy, followed by a ripple of panic. Shells were falling, and more soldiers were storming into the killing field. They wore imperial flak armor. Could it be? "Cadia and the Emperor!" The newcomer's battle cry sent a surge of pride through Auric. They had to be the remnants of Anvil Battalion, surely. But these soldiers looked too fresh, their armor too well maintained, to be the grizzled survivors of Auric's old battle group. It took another round of artillery bombardment for the veteran to understand what he was looking at. Shock troopers. There was only one place that could have deployed them. "It's Eastern Garrison!" He laughed out the words, disbelieving. "They heard the call!" Reinforcements. After all these months and all this sacrifice, almost overcome by relief, Auric felt his knees wobble, but though he swayed, he forced himself to keep his feet. The traitor lines buckled and many tried to disengage, but they did not get far. Precise artillery fire tore apart those who fled down the wide lane of the due east processional, while disciplined squads of shock troopers drove the rest into choke points to be massacred. And striding out at the centre of it all, bloody and relentless, came the Tattershields. The sight of them was enough. The enemy broke, and in a few minutes of methodical slaughter, it was all over. After the battle, while shock troopers finished off dying traitors and tended imperial wounded, the Kasrkin stood apart. They had removed their faceplates. That alone was the only sign of relief or relaxation any of them showed in front of the regular soldiers. But as Auric limped closer, the 5 of them wordlessly widened their circle, honouring him with the space beside them. A weary smile from Lind, a slap on the shoulder from Yarin. Even Auber, always scowling, gave a curt greeting with an upward flick of her chin and 2 terse words. "You lived." Auric could not suppress a harsh bark of laughter. The moment set hot pain through his battered body. "Yeah," he drawled. "Feels like it." One of the shock troopers came jogging over towards them. Noting her rank badges, the Tattershields threw fast, crisp salutes, fists crossing over chests in the sign of the Aquila. "I'm Captain Presek, 44-2nd, out of the Eastern Garrison," the officer announced, returning their salutes with one of his own, just as precise. Cadians were like that, Auric thought. Always professional. "Lind, Tattershields," the combat medic replied, and a warm smile replaced the officer's curt manner. "Pleased to relieve you, sir." Auric noted the title, and the respect glinting in the shock trooper's eyes. The elite Tattershields had that effect on regular soldiers, even officers. He had seen it before, had felt it before. Awe and fear and hope. Lind pushed on. "We aren't done yet. Anvil Battalion needs immediate reinforcement. I need to requisition transports and—" Presek's manner changed abruptly, and the momentary lightness replaced by something colder. "May not be possible," he admitted grudgingly, with a sweep of his arm towards his troops. "We're all HQ could spare. They're mustering for full-scale engagement." "Against who?" Lind asked. Presek glanced down at his boots, resolving himself before he met the Kasrkin's penetrating gaze. "You haven't heard?" "Of course not." A frown furrowed his brow. "When the comms blackout ended, our tech adepts were able to reconnect to the satellite net. Deep system watch points, everything. There's a squadron. 3 ships, heading in system from Mandeville." A sinking feeling was squirming in Auric's gut. He swallowed, bitterness slowly filling his mouth. "Allegiance?" Lind asked. The tightness of his voice made it clear what he suspected. "Heretic Astartes," Presek said. The words felt like knives. A hard silence stretched as they took it in. Alba spat into the rubble by her boots. Auric felt like he was going to be sick. No sooner had they completed their mission than their last hope was torn into shreds. It was enough to break anyone's spirit, but standing shoulder to shoulder with his fellow Imperial soldiers, the fresh, no-nonsense shock troopers, the grizzled, unbending, unbroken Kasrkin, Auric was surprised to find his feelings of utter desolation turn into defiance. Finally, a voice broke the gloomy silence, and Auric realized it was his own, blurting out in frustration. "Let them come, then," he said, fist balled at his sides. Surprised eyes turned to regard him. "Let them damn well try. We'll show them what we showed these traitors." He kicked a nearby heretic corpse for emphasis. "This is Gawain, and Gawain stands with Cadia." Auric did not know where he had found those words, or the strength to speak them, or the galvanizing ferocity that was now coursing like fire through his veins. But he saw the same fire on his allies' faces, in Alber's fierce snarl, in Yaren's eager smile, in Lynn's slow approving nod. They had a job to do. The enemy was coming, and they would fight them to the end. Note: if you like to read more tales of the Tattershields, look out for Veterans of the Fall, coming soon from the Black Library.